Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading from Death in the Pines, a novel set in Vermont. You have to be crazy to do this. On a morning when the Vermont winter sun shone pale and weak across 6 crisp inches of fresh snow, when the temperature hovered somewhere between 20 and 25 degrees Fahrenheit, I spent a long time searching for 10 stones. They had to be the right stones, of a certain weight and shape, heavy but not so heavy they exhausted me, rounded but not so much that they would roll from the place I set them. It took hours to find all 10 of them, searching in the sheltered places where the dry, powdery snow was easier to scrape aside. But then they had to be lugged to the spot I had selected, mindless beast of burden work that made me sweat inside my downline jacket. I stacked the stones carefully into a hollow, truncated pyramid. Anyone coming across that pile of stones in 10 or 100 years would know they weren't dropped there haphazardly by a retreating glacier. This was a made thing, too small to be a cairn, too insignificant to be the remnants of a wall. I guess you could call it an altar. The ashes were in a bronze urn, far too small to contain the spirit of my friend John Lincoln. The container had stood on the shelf in my cabin for too many months. The new year had just arrived, and with it a belated first snowfall of the season, and the combination of the two had finally persuaded me it was time to do something about the urn. Holding it in the chill, near silence of the forest, I stood over the structure I'd made and looked off into the distance, seeing but not seeing the brownish shafts of pines streaked with snow, the bare gray trunks of maples, the white and gray columns of birch, the deep shaded greens of white burdened firs. At that moment, the urn felt heavier than the stones themselves. This was why I was here. The mind drifts at such times. Even after 6 years, I could recall the particular night that had caused me to travel to this place. On that night, my mentor, no, by that time my friend, John and I had been slumped in the rotting front seat of an ancient rusting 55 Ford, parked in the heavy, humid midnight of Central America. Despite the choking reek of insect repellent, voracious mosquitoes whined in through the open windows, and from time to time we slapped an offender, reducing it to a crumble of tissue to be flicked off with a fingertip. Still warmer than blood heat even at that hour. The dark air sizzled with cicadas. We had left our home base in Atlanta a week before and had taken a circuitous route to this dark clearing hacked from the jungle. We were waiting for either 3 or 4 men to emerge from a blacked-out warehouse, and we had no idea whether those men knew we were watching or how well they might be armed. What we would do depended on how many came out. If only 3, we'd move in and recover what had been stolen. 4 would make the recovery problematic, because that would mean that at least one of the men would be a local, complicating the calculus of violence. As I stood over the stone altar, every detail of our conversation went through my mind. A tape rewound and replayed. By that point in our lives, John and I had been partners for so long that we didn't BS each other, had no need to strain for machismo, no use for phony heartiness. We were a good team. We could finish each other's sentences, catch body language signals that amounted to a silent code, recognize unspoken concerns and anxieties in time to be prepared for the unexpected. We told all our jokes to each other years before. Once in a while, one of us might mutter 2 or 3 words of a punchline. The other would chuckle in appreciation or exasperation as the mood took him. That night, in stop-and-start fashion, we had each spoke of good times we'd had. Waiting in the dark gave each of us a natural urge to talk. That was the one and only time that John had spoken of his quiet way in the forested hills of Vermont, thinking of the coolness of a New England autumn in that hellish tropic night. I'd never known that he'd been to Vermont. He had lived in Buckhead, a suburb of Atlanta, the whole time I'd known and worked with him. But in those suffocating hours of darkness, cool green Vermont was on his mind. Beautiful place, very peaceful, he said. I'd like to go back there when it's all over. I didn't have time to ask what he meant or what would be over. The job, the summer, the career, the life. At that moment, dim yellow light from a kerosene lantern appeared on the black face of the warehouse. First a line, then a thin rectangle, then a fat square as the three men inside pushed open the double doors. John and I climbed out of our borrowed car and did our job. In the 6 years that followed that night, John never had gone back to Vermont, had never spoken of it again. And now for him, it really was all over. After the memorial service, after the will was probated, I didn't feel like hanging around Atlanta. So I made arrangements, gave most of my liquid assets to a community for abused kids in New Hampshire, and bought a cabin on 200 acres in the woods of Vermont. It was here I'd brought my old friend to the place he'd talked about. Pondering the finality of it all, I held the urn containing his ashes, a few bone fragments and pieces of his teeth, ready to fulfill a promise I had never made. Such a time demands words. I took a deep breath of icy air and looked up toward the top of a towering birch. A squirrel made an untidy, tangled nest up there in the highest branches, and the animal itself, or maybe another squirrel, who could tell, hung below the nest, head down in the trunk, apparently gazing at me. I imagined the squirrel's bright black eye held accusation. The fall had gone on so long, probably for half the animal's lifetime. So what was the idea of all this snow? Was I to blame? Clearing my throat, I reached far back into memory, groping for the prayers I had last recited as a child. I heard myself say, "Dear God." My words took flight toward the washed-out sky on puffs of vapor. As far as I could tell, no one heard them but me and the squirrel. My voice had a harsh tone even to my own ears, a rusty hinge catch. The book is Death in the Pines. It's an Oakley Tyler novel based in Vermont.
From studios underwritten in part by Sputnik Radio, this is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. Well, the hearings are going on right now in the Senate for Jeff Sessions. I'd say so far of what I've seen, I didn't see the whole thing. I had a doctor's appointment this morning, so I missed part of it. But and by the way, I'm healing well. So that's the good news from the doctor's appointment. But it seemed to me like Dick Durbin drew the most blood, and Sessions' answer basically to everything was, well, I'll just do what Congress says, particularly when they were talking about the 800,000 Dreamers. And, he said to Sessions, you've attacked this, you've attacked the president for doing this. What are you going to do as Attorney General? And Sessions basically didn't answer the question. He said, I'll do what I will enforce the laws that Congress passes. Now, the Dreamers being set aside from deportation hearings was not a law that Congress passed. It was an executive order issued by President Obama that Donald Trump has at various times promised to do, to undo, to change, to modify, whatever. God only knows what he's going to do, but it's not a law that Congress passed. And Sessions basically just never responded. I mean, numerous opportunities, he was given numerous opportunities to say, are you a racist or not? And of course he said, no, I'm not. Gee, what a surprise. So anyhow, that's going on. This circus is circus is the wrong word. This is our democracy, or it's at least our government at work, and a fine thing it is. So, if you caught anything in the hearings this morning that you thought was worthy of sharing or commenting on, feel free to call in. But or pretty much anything else. That said, I have an 1.5 inch thick stack of paper here that we're killing trees, I know, but things that I think are interesting and consequential. And in fact, there was one in particular that I was going to track down. Well, Alan Leslie Combs, is with the California Institute of Integral Studies. And he's part of this group that David Loy started years ago, that I've been part of for years and years, that was looking at Charles Darwin Charles Darwin's original theory of evolution, if you actually read Darwin, which David Loy has committed his lifetime to, or much of it, he's now 91 years old. He's the husband of Rihanna Eisler, by the way, who wrote The Chalice and the Sword and other brilliant books about, about feminism largely and history. And Alan has written a piece that is going to show up in an anthology shortly. And my apologies, I'll have to mention later exactly when and where. I thought I'd printed it out, but I don't have it with me. But I have this article that he wrote. But out of the article, in the article that Alan wrote, there were a couple of quotes, and what they were talking about was this idea of the cycles of history, and this in particular the 80-year cycles of history of boom bust and war, and which, as you know, is a central theme not only of my thinking and of my program, but is the essential core of my last book, The Last Hours of, the Crash of 2016, which probably should be retitled The Crash of 2017. We'll see. But in fact, I want to revisit that book. But the thesis of the book is, this is how these things happen. And there were a couple of quotes in here that Alan Colmes found that I thought were really great. One was from Richard Rorty. This was just 20 years ago. And I'm sharing these with you because I think we're at this moment in time, and I want to share with you some stuff from David Brock and from Bernie Sanders. David Brock is actively reaching out to Bernie right now. Bernie last night did an amazing town hall on CNN. A friend of ours texted me saying, "Are you watching this?" I was, "What? No, I missed the first part of it." And I think that what's happening right before our eyes is that the cycle is happening. The change is happening. It's messy. These things are always messy, but it's happening. So anyhow, this was from the book Achieving Our Country, The Leftist Thought in 20th Century America by Harvard University Press, 1998, by Richard Rorty. He wrote, members of labor unions and unorganized skilled workers will sooner or later realize that their government is not even trying to prevent wages. Now, keep in mind, this was 1998. This was, 2 years before George Bush. This was the tail end of the Clinton administration. Members of labor unions and unorganized, and I don't mean this in the context of Bill Clinton or anything like that, just trying to position it in time. Members of labor unions and unorganized skilled workers will sooner or later realize that their government is not even trying to prevent wages from sinking or to prevent jobs from being exported. 20 years ago, this guy wrote this. Around the same time, those workers will realize that suburban white-collar workers, he's originally talking about blue-collar workers, that suburban white-collar workers, themselves desperately afraid of being downsized, are not going to let themselves be taxed to provide social benefits for anyone else. At that point, something will crack. The non-suburban electorate will decide that the system has failed and start looking around for a strong man to vote for, someone willing to assure them that once he's elected, the smug bureaucrats, the tricky lawyers, the overpaid bond salesmen, and the postmodernist professors will no longer be calling the shots. One thing that is very likely to happen is that the gains made in the past 40 years by black and brown Americans and by homosexuals will be wiped out. Jocular contempt for women will come back into fashion. All the resentment which badly educated Americans feel about having their manners dictated to them by college graduates will find an outlet. That was 20 years ago. Richard Rorty, in his book Achieving Our Country, basically, I believe, describing a large chunk of the Trump electorate. So then we go back 80 years from now, of course, was the Great Depression and World War II. And I've played no shortage of, clips from Franklin Roosevelt and whatnot on this program. 80 years before that was the Great Crash of 1857, followed by the American Civil War. 80 years before that was the great crash of 1770, followed by, it wasn't so much a great crash as a prolonged depression, so much so that it caused England in 1773 to raise the tax on tea, to drop the tax on tea for the East India Company to try to stimulate their business, and raise taxes in the colonies and other things because they needed money, which led directly to the American Revolution. Well, it turns out 80 years before that, there was another event, and Nathaniel Hawthorne, in his book Twice Told Tales, which was published in 1837, Nathaniel Hawthorne writes, one afternoon in April 1689, as the American colony, 1689, keep in mind, this is 3 generations before the American Revolution. One afternoon in April of 1689, as the American colonies boiled with rumors that King James II was about to strip them of their liberties, the king's hand-picked governor of New England, Sir Edmund Andros, marched his troops menacingly through Boston. His purpose was to crush any thought of colonial self-rule. Everyone present, the future looked grim. Just at that moment, seemingly from nowhere, there appeared on the streets the figure of an ancient man with the eye, the face, the command, the attitude of command. His manner combining the leader and the saint, the old man planted himself firmly in the path of the approaching British soldiers and demanded that they stop. The solemn yet warlike peal of that voice, fit either to rule a host in the battlefield or to be raised to God in prayer, were irresistible. At the old man's word and outstretched arm, the roll of the drum was hushed at once, and the advanced British line stood still. Inspired by this single act of defiance, the people of Boston roused their courage and acted. Within the day, Andros, that was the toady of the Brits, right? The governor. Within the day, Andros was deposed and jailed, the liberty of Boston saved, and the corner turned on the colonial glorious revolution. That was referred to as the Glorious Revolution, and that was in 1637. So we're seeing these cycles. Peter Turchin from the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at the University of Connecticut has written a fascinating piece titled "Social Instability Lies Ahead." It's actually, it's by him. Yeah, it's by him. And he talks about this new science called cleodynamics, which is actually, he calls it a transdisciplinary discipline that treats history as just another science. And he says, 10 years ago, I started applying its tools to the society that I live in, the United States. What I discovered alarmed me. And I'm gonna take a break here, and when I come back, I want to go through the things that Peter Turchin identified. And then I want to get to Bernie's call that you call your congressman right now and talk about an amendment to protect Social Security and whatnot, and what David Brock had to say about it. So we've got a lot to cover today. In the meantime, we'll also be taking your phone calls and, keeping an eye on what's going on with the hearings and all these kind of things. So stick around. We're coming up on about 18 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back right after. And welcome back. Carl in Pearland, Texas, watching Free Speech TV on DirecTV. Hey, Carl, what's on your mind?
Hey, I just wanted to ask you if you could direct me where to go online to find out what my congressional representatives' insurance benefits are. Deductibles, caps, pre-existing conditions, all those kind of things.
Right.
I intend to go to a town hall meeting and ask him these things.
I don't know, Carl. I don't know the answer to that. I remember that during the Obamacare fight, there was an amendment that was introduced by one of the Republicans. I want to say Rick Santorum, but I'm not even sure he was in Congress at that time. But one of the anti-Obamacare Republicans introduced an amendment requiring members of Congress to get their health care through Obamacare, because up to that point, They basically had Obamacare. There were 4 or 5 different insurance companies that they could pick from. There were plans they could pick from, and then the government paid for it. And so it would just be basically transferring that to the Obamacare exchanges. So they'll have employer-provided insurance. What the details are, I know, varies from member to member. Bernie Sanders has talked about that on this program a couple of times. It's been a couple of years.
I mean,
but the way to find out specifically, Carl,
information that the public's entitled to.
Yeah, and I don't disagree, and I believe that members of Congress have a basic health care policy. Now they have access to other health facilities that other people don't. There's a gym in the Congress, there's health clubs, there's all this kind of stuff. But
my concern is here is most of us who have employer provided, as soon as we lose our job, we lose that.
Right.
And I think I've heard before that as retired members, if they've been in for so long, that they have a lifetime of insurance coverage.
I'm not sure about that. I know that they get a lifetime pension, and it goes up the longer they serve in Congress.
Well, would the GAO?
I would suggest that you're in Pearl in Texas, and so you want to confront your Republican member of the House.
Right.
Is there a Democratic member of the House in any congressional district near enough to you that you would know who they are, or you could call their office? Because I'm guessing even probably a Republican member of Congress, if you simply called their office and asked that question in a very friendly fashion and said, "I'm trying to understand this. What are the circumstances?" that they would tell you.
Well, I don't want to embarrass anybody. The thing is I just, I think there needs to be some fairness into the system here.
Yeah.
I'm upset about all this. But anyway, I'll let you go, Tom, and thank you.
Well, I think, I don't, thank you, Carl. I don't disagree with you, by the way. And the fact that every member of Congress has employer-provided health insurance, and the employer is us.
Yeah.
And that every member of Congress has a pension, a defined benefit pension, while Congress has been, ever since the Reagan administration, doing everything they can to destroy pensions and replace them with 401ks and IRAs that make lots of money for banksters. And, basically, unless you're an investment wizard, which is maybe 1 in 10,000 of us, means that, your savings are not going to be as good as they could be. I think it's just amazing that the Congress has given themselves the classic benefits that unions fight for, and yet they're constantly trying, the Republicans in Congress anyway, are constantly trying to deny them to us. But as to the specific details, Carl, I'd suggest you call a member of Congress. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So I was talking about cliodynamics, and Peter Turchin, he's professor of ecology and evolutionary biology at the University of Connecticut, who has, he wrote a book called Ultra Society, How 10,000 Years of War Made Humans the Greatest Cooperators on Earth, and Ages of Discord, a structural demographic analysis of American history. Fascinating stuff, a serious thinker. He looked at 40 seemingly disparate, seemingly different, unconnected social indicators, and found, as he applied this science of basically history, using history as historical data points and putting them in a scientific model, and essentially a mathematical model, he found 40 of these social indicators that experienced turning points during the 1970s. And I would argue that this was the beginning of the Reagan Revolution, and or the tail end of the New Deal and the Great Society. And Margaret Thatcher had gotten elected Prime Minister of the UK, and you had all this neoliberalism starting to rise, both in the Republican and Democratic parties, mostly Republican Party, and of course Reagan. So anyhow, he says 40 different data points. He says, my model indicated the social instability. He says, historically, such developments have served as leading indicators of political turmoil. My model indicated the social instability and political violence would peak in the 2020s. This was a study he did a number of years ago. He said the deep structural forces that brought us the current political crisis have not gone away. If anything, the negative trends seem to be accelerating, which again was the one of the theses of my book, Crash of 2016. He says some of these, for example, are growing income and wealth inequality, stagnating and even declining well-being of most Americans, growing political fragmentation and government dysfunction. He says these things seem like they're separate, but they are really all interconnected. He says, as I wrote 3 years ago, from 1983 to 2010, so that would be from year, 2 of the Bush or of the Reagan administration until 2010 when he wrote this. The number of American households worth at least $10 million grew from 66,000 up to 350,000 households. So he says increasing inequality leads not only to the growth of top fortunes, it also results in greater numbers of wealth holders. The 1% becomes the 2%, for example. He said rich Americans tend to be more politically active than the rest of the population. In technical terms, such a situation is known as elite overproduction. And then he talks about the intra-elite competition and political polarization, which produces the fragmentation of political parties. In other words, these forces are breaking up both the Republican and Democratic Party. He says the Republican Party is in the process of splitting into 3 factions: traditional Republicans, Tea Party Republicans, and Trump populists. And similarly, in the Democratic Party, the major fault line dividing Bernie Sanders' Democratic Socialists from the establishment Democrats of Obama and Clinton. He said, but the other 2 factors in the model, popular immiseration, the stagnation and decline of living standards, and declining fiscal health of the state, resulting from falling state revenues and rising expenses, are also important contributors. And he adds, it seems unlikely that the Trump administration will succeed in reversing these negative trends, and some of the proposed policies will likely make them worse, drastically reducing taxes on wealthy Americans, for example. It's going to make this far worse. Which brings us to Bernie Sanders and what he is calling for. And let me just point to you. We'll talk about this in a little more detail in a little bit. I want to pick up your phone calls here after the break. But David Brock's piece at Medium.com, where he said, the headline of the piece, this is David Brock, the guy who basically was the number 3 person in the Hillary Clinton campaign. His headline, Dear Senator Sanders, I'm with you in the fight ahead. He says, it's no secret who I supported. Looking back, I recognize there were a few moments when my drive to put Hillary in the White House led me to give you too stiff a jab. I owe up to that. I regret it, and I apologize to you and your supporters. It's a 4-page letter by David Brock basically saying, I'm with you. America needs to get with you. The Democratic Party needs to get with you. To Bernie Sanders. And one of the people who contacted me last night saying, hey, you got to turn on CNN and watch Bernie Sanders, was somebody who I know voted for Donald Trump. And he's saying, if Bernie was running, if one of our, or I believe he voted for Donald Trump. He said, if Vermont were to become an independent republic and Bernie was going to run it, we'd move there. I mean, so this is happening. So right after the break, I'll tell you what Bernie's doing with regard to Donald Trump's agenda, and then we'll pick up your calls.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So stick around. We'll be right back.
Donald Trump, first he came after the Mexicans. And most white Republican families don't have any Mexicans, so they didn't care. Then he came after the Muslims, and most white Republican families don't have any Muslims and don't even know any, so they didn't care. And then he went after gay people, and most white Republican families have gay people but don't know it. Then he went after disabled people. And most white Republican families don't have any disabled people, and so they didn't care. And then he went after prisoners of war, John McCain, and most white Republican families don't have any prisoners of war, and so they didn't care. And then he went after white women, saying he could grab them in the crotch whenever he wanted, and because he was a star. And all of a sudden, all these white Republicans all across the country said, oh my God, I've got a white wife, a white daughter, a white mother, and Donald Trump just went over the top. Now, for the rest of us, he went over the top when he started with the Mexicans. Now, I mean, maybe that's because my niece is married to a fellow who's Mexican. I'm literally Mexican. But I don't think so. I think it's because I'm a human being and I'm capable of feeling empathy. Gay people, we all have gay people in our family, disabled people. I had a niece who was severely disabled. But, it's not about me. I mean, my point is that there's some real selective hysteria here. Meanwhile, Trump is saying, oh, this was just locker room banter. This was just locker room banter. Well, Donald Trump and Billy Bush is George W. Bush's nephew. They were a cousin, one or the other. And they were both born into dynasties. They were both born into very, very wealthy families, Donald Trump and Billy Bush. And I have to say, I mean, Louise grew up with a brother. I grew up with 3 brothers. I have never in my life heard a man brag about attacking women, about sexually assaulting women. Never heard it. Never. The kind of talk that Trump engaged in, where he talked about his ability to sexually assault women without consequence because of his fame and wealth, I've never heard before. And I don't think most men have, frankly. Now, the locker room stuff, you could argue, was the earlier stuff that with him and Billy Bush. And Billy Bush is getting all this fallout, all this, and he's been taken off to the Today Show this week and everything else. And, he was sucking up to Donald. And he participated in what you could arguably call locker room banter, which is, hey, look at her, isn't she hot kind of stuff. That's a different thing than saying that one can simply basically attack women, just walk up to them and grab them by the crotch. It's just, which is what. So this is Billy Bush and Donald Trump engaging in what you might call locker room banter. But anyhow, your thoughts on this here. Let's play this.
She's your girl's hottie in the purple.
Whoa.
Yes.
Whoa.
Yes, the Donald has scored.
Whoa.
Oh, my man. Look at those legs. All I can see is the legs.
No, it looks good.
Come on, Shorty.
Oh, nice legs, huh?
Oof, get out of the way, honey. Oh, that's good legs.
Yeah, nice legs, right? Good legs. Okay. That probably qualifies as locker room banter. And I have heard that kind of language before, and I think probably most men have. And I'm guessing that a lot of women have heard women sizing up men the same way. But then, and I'm not going to play the clip, but then Trump goes off on his, I can do anything I want to, or that he can do anything he wants to women. And that's where it went off the rails. And that is not locker room banter. That is bragging about sexual assault. Now, last night he said he's never done that. A bunch of women had come forward and said that he did. His defense: here's women that Bill Clinton assaulted. Well, A, that's not proven, but whether it's true or not is irrelevant. Bill Clinton isn't running for president. In fact, Bill Clinton got impeached over something close to that kind of behavior. Paid the price for it. But Donald Trump is running for president right now. And he clearly carries these, at least in my opinion, clearly carries these misogynistic perspectives, worldview, and this sense of entitlement, of absolute entitlement. That, well, in fact, we saw it on display last night, in particular during the debate, when Trump went off on how he could basically, he was going to put Hillary Clinton in jail. I don't have time for the clip right now, but this is the same thing. I mean, this is, he's a tough guy. He's a bully guy. And do you really, let me say to Trump supporters out there, do you really want
a bully, a misogynist? Do you really want that caliber of person in the White House?
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All the important stories we cover and the issues we care about are at hartmanreport.com. Members of our community can comment and join the conversation.
So let me just wrap this up. I want to do it by sharing with you, in the previous segment. By the way, the reference from the book is going to be edited by Irvin Laszlo, and it'll be a collection of essays. I don't have a title for it, from Alan Leslie Combs' piece that I was quoting, the pieces that he was quoting from, for just FYI. But anyhow, David Brock, Bernie Sanders, very quickly, and then I'll get to your calls. David Brock at Medium.com, he writes, "We who reject Trump's bankrupt leadership," and again, David Brock was arguably one of the most partisan is, I'm not sure is the right word, because it was Hillary versus Bernie, but so it was within the same party, but partisans as in my side versus your side, in the entire Clinton campaign, right? So which makes this all the more remarkable. David Brock writes, "We who reject Trump's bankrupt leadership must heal old wounds, reorient ourselves, and embrace common goals. And if there is one thing on this which we can all agree, it's this: we cannot concede any ground. Not to the alt-right, not to the Kochs, not to the Paul Ryan establishment, and not most of all to Donald Trump, our incoming kleptocrat-in-chief. We must unify in resistance." He says, "Senator Sanders, we need you to continue to be a voice of reason in a world that has spun out of control. You have consistently devoted yourself," and this is fascinating because he gets into the fairness doctrine here. He says, "You have consistently devoted yourself to ensuring a free and fair press. In your House days, I remember you being one of the few to attend a congressional hearing about the fairness doctrine, where despite a mostly empty room, you posed thoughtful and penetrating questions. You introduced a bill to restore that doctrine, to guard against wildly biased and inaccurate media outlets, and how prescient that concern was. In this past election, we saw the media abdicate its vital public mission, cynically fueling Trump's candidacy for money and ratings." This was the point of my big rant yesterday. He said, David Brock then continues his letter to Bernie Sanders. He says, "We need you to continue holding the corporate media's feet to the fire. One of the signature issues of your campaign was getting money out of politics. Even though I run a super PAC, I am with you on this. I'd love to get out of the business, but not while the Republicans are permitted super PACs. The playing field must be level. You have long sounded the alarm and called out puppet masters like the billionaire Koch brothers. I agree that their cash poisons our democracy. Together, we can resist the predatory billionaires that Donald Trump seeks to install in his cabinet. We need you, Senator Sanders, to use your position and pulpit in the Senate to remind the nation of who was most hurt in the last financial crisis and who stands to be victimized by the next one. Now, if I may, this is, again, David Brock writing from the Clinton campaign. Now, if I may, let me speak directly to your supporters. If you voted for Senator Sanders, you almost certainly realize that Trump is a very real threat to our way of life, our shared values, and our constitutional democracy. We are all now small d Democrats. What was said in the heat of the campaign cannot drive us apart in the face of such an overwhelming threat. Senator Sanders, David Brock writes, we need to be bold and united. Without fear or hesitation, we must oppose Trump. We must stand up for and defend our shared values. The progressive movement is strong and growing, thanks in large part to your candidacy, Senator Sanders, which electrified so many voters. The bedrock American values you championed of pluralism, equality, and opportunity are ones I share, and I hope that we can be partners in the fight ahead. Sincerely, David Brock. That is a letter that I never thought I'd see, and I'm just blown away by this. So, I signed up for Our Revolution. OurRevolution.com is the website. It's kind of Bernie's not directly involved because Senate ethics rules prevent him from being directly involved. But I got an email from Our Revolution yesterday, from the Bernie's thing, here. It says, Tom, during this campaign, Trump promised he would make no cuts to Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid. He said it would be unfair to the people who have been paying into those programs for years. Now, Republicans have proposed a budget that would throw 30 million Americans off their health insurance. They want to privatize Medicare, raise prescription costs, and reduce Social Security benefits, which serve as the primary source of income for the majority of seniors. Tomorrow, that would be today, because I got this email yesterday. So today, Tuesday, Bernie is introducing a budget amendment that would prevent Senate Republicans from breaking Donald Trump's campaign promise to make no cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Will you help make sure that enough senators support this amendment so that it will be passed? And there's a link in there to a toll-free number that you can use to call Congress. And that number is 877-826-4344, although most people don't need toll-free numbers anymore. Most people have unlimited or plenty of minutes on their phones and whatnot. And so the direct line into Congress is 202-225-3121. And if you read the Our Revolution page, it says, call your senator to tell them to support Bernie's budget amendment to prevent Republicans from making cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. So please, may I encourage you right now, write down this phone number, 202-225-3121, or if you need a toll-free number, 877-826-4344. 877-826-4344. And this gets you right through to the Senate switchboard. And then you can just say, hey, I'm from wherever, and I'd like to talk to my senator. I had to say for wherever, because I was thinking, who's my senator? And then, oh, yeah, I live in D.C. I don't have a senator. But in any case, that's a whole nother rant. So he says the talking points, what you can say about why we must protect Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid. These are the bullet points. The Republican budget proposal could lead to 30 million Americans losing their health insurance. It's unacceptable for Republicans to throw tens of millions of Americans off their health care plans with nothing to replace it. Republican attempts to privatize Medicare put seniors at risk. Cutting Medicaid could threaten nursing home care for millions of seniors. Many Americans already struggle to cover the cost of their prescriptions, and the budget proposal would lead to increased prescription drug costs. The majority of seniors rely on Social Security benefits as their primary source of income. Donald Trump promised during his campaign that he would not allow Republicans to cut Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. And frankly, I believe that that's why a lot of people independents voted for Donald Trump. Again, I keep saying this because with regard to the social safety net and international trade, Donald Trump ran as a Democrat. In fact, as a populist Democrat. And then back to the talking points. Donald Trump promised during his campaign he would not allow these cuts. Republicans should stop wasting time trying to take away crucial health care coverage and benefits. Bernie's amendment would prevent the Senate from breaking Donald Trump's campaign promises to not cut Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. So if you want to call your member of Congress, your senator, this is two senators, specifically that Bernie is calling for, at 877-826-4344 or 202-225-3121. And you get through, and you have an interesting experience, feel free to give us a call and tell us what you learned. George in Chicago. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Let me get you off the speaker, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you very kindly, George.
Two quick points. First, from time to time, we've heard discussions about the American tradition of the peaceful transfer of power when there's a change in presidential administrations.
Right.
I contend that because of the constant violent and belligerent rhetoric by Trump and the Republicans, the many violent acts they incited their followers to, and the giant increase in hate crimes that's occurred since Trump got elected, that we have not had a peaceful transfer of power this time, and I expect more violence to come. And this also bears watching in addition to the economic crimes the Republicans are getting ready to commit. The other point I'd like to make very quickly, and this, thanks to you who's been publicizing his plight all these years, there's slightly less than 10 days left for President Obama to pardon Governor Don Siegelman.
Right.
And I would just urge all the followers of Thom Hartmann's show to contact the White House and urge the president to pardon Governor Siegelman before he leaves.
Yes, and the White House comment line, if I may, is 202-456-1111.
That is correct, Tom. However, when I called the comment line last week, I was told by the White House operator that it has been shut down until the new administration comes in.
Oh, really?
So you would have to go to www.whitehouse.gov/contact or Facebook Messenger, or I'm assuming postcards would probably still get through. But I would just hope that all of your listeners would bombard the president with requests for Governor Siegelman's pardon, because as I understand it, his sentence won't run out until August.
Right. Well, I thought he got out of jail in February. Maybe it's August. It's sometime this year. But then he's also got this whole long probationary period and all this other stuff. And he really does need to be pardoned. He never committed a crime. This was a political prosecution instigated by Karl Rove and his buddies. And, I'm with you. George, thank you. And thanks for listening to WCPT. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
More of your calls right after this. And welcome back. Rob, watching us on YouTube in Chicago. Hey, Rob, what's up? Rob?
Hey, Tom. How you doing?
Hey, I'm well. What's on your mind?
So I just wanted your thoughts on the notion that Trump is some kind of nationalist populist that will rescue the American people from the clutches of the George Soros global elite and the corporate coup d'etat.
Right.
So I also wanted your thoughts on how Anonymous, the hacker group, and how Alex Jones all plays into this.
I don't have any idea how Anonymous or Alex Jones would play into it, other than that Alex Jones has apparently been the source of some of Donald Trump's conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
But the idea of Trump as a nationalist savior, I would refer you to a brilliant book that John Dean wrote. John Dean used to be Richard Nixon's lawyer. He's now retired and writes. He's got his own blog, and he writes for Just Store, as I recall. But it's easy to find. Just Google him. And he wrote a book called Conservatives Without a Conscience. And it's about this particular personality type of the authoritarian. And there are authoritarian leaders. Donald Trump is clearly one of them. And then there are authoritarian followers. And, we see them at the Trump rallies, the people who are just like, they're like the brown shirt kind of things.
Yeah.
And authoritarian followers are always looking for a savior. It's a variation on salvationistic thinking, that somebody else will save us. We can't save ourselves, so we need somebody to save us. So we need a strong man. And that's a very, very dangerous thing. I mean, the whole idea of our democracy was based on rejecting that, on repudiating that. The whole idea of a presidency that was very narrowly circumscribed, a president who couldn't make laws, a president who had to enforce the laws made by Congress, a president that could be held in check even by the Supreme Court, was a repudiation of that idea, that strongman, that authoritarian idea. As much as Alexander Hamilton may have liked the idea, he wanted a president for life and he wanted more powers for the president, he didn't get it, and which is a good thing. I mean, Alexander Hamilton was one of our early conservatives, he and John Adams. A little harder to place Jefferson on the modern day political spectrum, but that whole idea of a nationalist savior is on the one hand, I don't disagree with you. One of the reasons why Donald Trump got elected, a lot of people thinking, he's the guy, he's going to save us, he's going to make everything wonderful again. But it's also the thing that's so dangerous, because if he is not successful, and, or at least perceived as being successful, those people are going to turn to another savior. And who is that going to be? Is it going to be somebody who's even crazier than Trump, who's even more of an authoritarian than Trump? I don't know, but that's the probability. And so far what Trump has been doing is he has, for example, the Chrysler, making $1 billion investment in the United States to Chrysler and Ford to grow their factories These were decisions that were actually written into union contracts. It's the unions a year and a half ago that got Ford and Chrysler to commit to keeping manufacturing in the United States and to expand it. It was the unions. Donald Trump tweeted out yesterday or the day before that he took credit for it and he did it. He did not. It was a lie, as is common with Donald Trump. But his followers believed that. So we're going to have a real interesting 4 years here of expectations versus reality, perceptions versus reality. We'll see where it goes, Rob. Thanks for the call. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Al Franken is interrogating Jeff Sessions right now, but what I've seen of this is, one of the there's an interesting dynamic here at work, and that is that most people understand. Actually, most people don't understand that if you want to help somebody, you ask them the toughest, most critical question possible because it gives them an opportunity to answer it and to get it out of the way. And Jeff Sessions has been clearly very, very, very well prepped for this. He also knows what he's doing. He's been in the Senate for a couple of decades. He's been a prosecutor. He's been around the block, forever. He knows what he's doing. So I'll just be amazed if anybody succeeds in laying a glove on this guy. The Senate is its own club. So we'll see where it goes. John in Boulder, Colorado. Hey, John, you had some thoughts on David Brock?
Yes. Hi, Tom. I think we need to be a little bit more circumspect about the David Brock's history and take that letter, as welcoming as it may be, with a grain of salt about the size of a salt cake out in the pasture. I'm not real willing to go lick it yet.
Yeah.
I have to remember, David Brock came up with the line about Anita Hill, a little bit nutty, a little bit slutty.
Oh, I know. He wrote the book Trashing Her. I'm not suggesting that David Brock is brilliant or some kind of, he's going to save anything. I'm very clear-eyed about this. David Brock runs a super PAC. David Brock gave a speech a couple of weeks ago to a couple of hundred millionaires, asking for their money. He's trying to build his own empire. He has his own empire. He's trying to expand his own empire. And he's basically hooking, he's in this letter, he's trying to hook onto Bernie's coattails. I get all that, and I get that in the most cynical fashion, which is what I think you're trying to say to me. Hey, Tom, you should be more cynical about this. I get all that.
I don't want you to be cynical. I just said circumspect.
Okay, and circumspect is good, because what this says to me is David Brock is also no idiot. He's a political genius, maybe a dark arts genius, but he's a political genius. And if he has decided that he needs Bernie and Bernie's followers and Bernie's worldview, that tells me that the institutional power brokers inside the Democratic Party, and we had this conversation a week ago, John, on this program about Chuck Schumer. Same thing. He's aggressively reaching out to Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, the what I refer to as the FDR LBJ wing, the Great Society, the New Deal wing of the Democratic Party, which Keith Ellison represents, and he's running to lead the party. That watching these people who came out of the Clinton campaign reach out aggressively to Bernie tells me that Bernie was right all along. Not to say that Hillary was wrong, because she was moving in his direction too, but that the future of the Democratic Party is to go back to its genuine progressive roots rather than trying to figure out a new way to raise money and be a corporate party. I mean, which in many places and in many areas it has become. Bernie, I mean, the other thing we have to keep in mind here, John, is that Bernie appears to be an anomaly, right? Who is this guy? Why is he the only smart one in the Senate? That kind of stuff. But Bernie has a very unique situation that is only shared by mostly Republican senators from other small states, and that is because there's only 600,000 people in Vermont. Bernie does not wake up every morning knowing that he has to raise, $50,000 or $100,000.
Right.
He literally did not run a single television ad the last time he ran for election.
I know, and Mr. Brock ran quite a few.
Yeah,
Correct
exactly.
the record, which really should have been called corrupt the record.
I don't disagree. And, I'm not a fan of David Brock, and I've had personal interactions with David Brock that were very unpleasant. But that said, the fact that somebody like David Brock is coming around to this tells me that the Democratic Party, which I've been very worried was fissured and fractured and tearing itself apart, is actually coming together. And it's coming together. And like I said, we're seeing this in a big way with Chuck Schumer. And completely rebooting the leadership of the party and bringing in Elizabeth Warren and bringing in Tammy Duckworth and bringing in Bernie Sanders, that the Democratic Party is moving in a progressive direction, and that the Democratic Party movers and shakers get it, that if they want to have political power, if they want to change the course of America, the way to do it is not the namby-pamby, a little of this, a little of that, let's triangulate, let's compromise. The way to do that is to stand up and be Democrats, to be Democrats in the mold of Franklin Roosevelt, in the mold of John Kennedy, in the mold of Lyndon Johnson, in the mold of, although I don't think he ever identified himself specifically as a Democrat, I'd say Martin Luther King. People of absolute conscience, people who stood up and stood solid. So, I understand what you're saying, John, and thank you for calling and saying it because it needed to be said. Dee in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Dee, what's on your mind?
I just wanted to say the true terrorist is the Republican Party. The pledge that they took at the beginning of President Obama's administration to be 100% against President Obama, which is against the USA, 100% against. It's okay to disagree, but 100% against, supported by the teabaggers. Those are the true terrorists.
Well, hang on, Dee, if we can just recalibrate our language, terrorism is killing people or causing massive destruction in order to frighten people to the point that they react in the way that you want them to react. And that is not what the Republicans did to President Obama. What the Republicans did to President Obama was obstruction. And the way that they did it and the planning for it, including Mitch McConnell's refusing to give Merrick Garland a hearing for the Supreme Court, in my opinion, is actually sedition. So if you want a word for the Republicans, I would say they are seditious. They're not that they're terrorists. Am I making sense, Dee?
Yes, you are. The bottom line is that we had fallen prey to it. We have been brainwashed by this act. And when we look at the Democratic Party or Hillary Clinton as the enemy, the people who are trying to help us and supporting, basically supporting, I'm trying to find a different word instead of the devil, AKA Republican Party, the new Republican Party, because this isn't the one that I grew up with.
Yeah, no, these guys are reactionaries.
And that's why it made the ground fertile for any outside nation to come in and use our hatred and our fear to work against us by brainwashing us through all of this massive media, the negative massive media that we have attached to certain titles.
Well, and our media itself, our corporate television media, gave $3 billion worth of free airtime to Donald Trump. They made him the Republican nominee, and then they made him president. And, that's the biggest story that nobody's reporting, which just, blows my mind that it's the biggest story that nobody's reporting, but it really is. Dee, thank you for the call. Well said. We'll be back right after this. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by EcoWine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, EcoWine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. And welcome to Thom Hartmann University, our book club. And today we're reading from Ralph Nader's Breaking Through Power. It's easier than we think. This is from page 74, the chapter How the System is Rigged. According to Russell Mokaber, editor of the Corporate Crime Reporter, quote, corporate crime takes far more lives, causes far more injuries and diseases, and steals far more money than street crime. But the vast amount of law enforcement resources, mass media attention, and prison cell blocks are devoted only to street crime. Just consider these preventable casualties. Almost 60,000 annual workplace-related fatalities from both disease and trauma. 54,000 deaths a year from air pollution. Over 100,000 lives lost as a result of medical malpractice. Nearly 100,000 lives lost from hospital-induced infections. Over 100,000 fatalities from adverse effects of drugs, and over 40,000 deaths every year due to inadequate or no health care coverage for diagnosis, treatment, and medication. There are far larger numbers of sicknesses and injuries attached to these data sets. These statistics have haunting human faces. Children, women, men, and families destroyed by uncontrollable, monetized minds. Whether they are caused by recklessness, criminal negligence, or worse, the key factors in common are the preventability of such pain and the suffering inflicted from commercially induced neglect, predation, manslaughter, and homicide. By comparison, street and home homicides do not exceed 14,000 lives lost annually. Now see how companies have made sure they have the laws that they need to go after you, and how they make sure that the law can be used as their punisher. The giant multi-tiered home mortgage business, now driven by the same one-percenters who profited from crashing the economy in 2008, can nail you if you misrepresent information on your mortgage application. Suppose you say you're going to occupy your house as a principal residence to get a lower interest rate and down payment, and you don't for some reason. Lenders can call the loan and demand repayment if the mortgage balance is outstanding. Absent that payment, the lender can seize your home, foreclosure. In addition, by claiming you committed bank fraud, these companies can use the FBI against you. As the veteran housing columnist Kenneth R. Harvey warned, this can trigger severe financial penalties, prosecution, and prison time for ordinary Americans. But how many bankers feel the cold metal of handcuffs tighten on their wrists when their crimes rob American families of their homes and life savings? Health insurance companies have similar supporting laws to deny medical coverage by alleging illegal activities. This could mean anything from non-disclosure of traffic violations to gun accidents, even when there has been no conviction. It could mean something as vague as hazardous behavior, according to the New York Times. If a company paid you and comes back for their money, they can get you prosecuted for fraud. These corporate Goliaths are too big to fail. If they know how to enact laws to make sure that you are, and they know how to enact laws to make sure that you are too small to stop them. Corporate state culture, the plutocracy oligarchy, is given an astonishing exoneration, so long as it claims that violence and mayhem are not their direct purpose, but an unfortunate byproduct that just couldn't be helped. Like when innocent people are accidentally killed by U.S. drone attacks, the government seems to quietly get a free pass. It's almost as if corporations get away with a permanent defense of an institutional insanity, a defense going global in terms of deadly supply chains, from horrific African mines to dangerous factories in China, in India, and Bangladesh. Deoxygenation and poisoning of the vast oceans, estuaries, rivers, and lakes. upping greenhouse gases into rapid climate destabilization, extending the range of infectious diseases due to habitat and ecological disruption and desecration, and changing the nature of nature itself through unregulated genetic engineering and nanotechnology. Even with 6 million slow, agonizing deaths a year globally attributed to the tobacco business, cigarettes are still demonically promoted by one-percenters who reap staggering profits from selling their addictive and poisonous product, especially in developing nations where regulations protecting children do not exist. The excuse is forever that corporatists have no intention, knowledge, or reason to do harmful things. The institutional insanity defense again. Or the manufacturers of weapons of mass destruction, whose militant advertisements say they are just helping the national defense, but are not at all responsible for their products' use in the coercive policies of empire and perpetual war. Is it institutional madness or infantilism? Did the World War II allies let the giant Krupp works in Germany get away with this excuse after the war ended? It's time for people to take away these rationalizations of omnicide from corporations that demand they be legally privileged as persons for the pursuit of profits, but not as persons for our pursuit of them as criminal predators and refugees from justice. In the 2012 U.S. presidential campaign, Republican nominee Mitt Romney, asked about corporate personhood, replied that it was a given, saying, "Hey, corporations are people, my friend," like it was a science fact he learned in 5th grade. This is no mere throwaway line. Billions of dollars of litigating, advertising, marketing, and corporatist commentary have been focused on driving this people image into our minds from childhood. Regularly, full-page ads show that Goliath corporations like Walmart or Lockheed Martin are just people like you. The ads are filled with pictures and names of the faithful workers who bring you goods and services. The book by Ralph Nader, Breaking Through Power.
Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights.
From studios underwritten in part by Sputnik Radio, this is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and I'm really pleased to have in the studio with me Angel Padilla, also known as Angel Padilla. Great having you with us, a member of the Indivisible team, the co-author of Indivisible, a practical guide for resisting Trump. You can find this at indivisibleguide.com. Yep. And you can tweet Angel at Angel RAF Padilla, Padilla, right? Okay. Or at Indivisible Team. At Indivisible Team, yep. So tell us about Indivisible.
Sure. So basically, a group of former congressional staffers got together, and after the Trump election, we were feeling the way that a lot of people were feeling, just a lot of grief, anger, and sadness, and just trying to figure out who we were, what we could do. Right? We were very unhappy with the outcome, and we wanted to do something, and so we thought, what can we as congressional staffers do? And that's the one thing we do know is Congress, the way it works, and what matters to members of Congress. So we. A group of us got together and drafted this guide that we hope will serve as a resource to groups around the country, so that their voices are heard, so that we can do what we can to stop this Trump agenda from moving forward. Basically, what we took the useful lessons from the Tea Party back in 2009, 2010, those things that worked, but devoid of that really sort of nasty behavior that we saw. So not the hatred and the racism and the sexism, all of that stuff. None of that is useful. And as progressives, we obviously don't believe in that. But there were some really good lessons that the Tea Party taught us. And so we wanted to use those things to make sure that we can do whatever we can to stop this Trump agenda from moving forward.
Yeah, there was a group, the Concord Project, I believe it's called, that did a series of DVDs, and they're on YouTube now, where they talked about how the most powerful position in the United States is a committee precinct person. Get involved at the local level. And I've played those over and over again on this program. At the end of every show, I beg people, get inside the Democratic Party, show up at the meetings, become a precinct committee person, exactly, at least as a starting point. So what are your specific recommendations?
So for us, I think there were two big strategies that the Tea Party used, and that was act locally, and the second is be defensive. We're in Washington now, and to a lot of people around the country, it's just a bubble, and there's a lot of things going on in Congress or in the administration, and a lot of people just might not understand what is going on, and they might see it's just sort of far removed from where they live. And so what we're saying is you don't need to come to Washington to make an impact, right? There are regional offices and district offices. Your members care about what you think as a voter, as a constituent, and you can go down to their office and make your voice heard. What we saw, what was most effective back in 2009, 2010, and in the years following basically the big ACA fight, was that if you got in a member's face, it really sort of jarred them, and it really sort of scared them. The last thing we want is a member to feel secure, right? That he's not or she is not accountable to their constituents. So that was one of the big lessons, right? Like act locally. The second one is the Tea Party was very consistently the party of no, right? They didn't have a policy agenda. They were just stop the Obama agenda, and it worked, right? I mean, back in 2009. The Democrats were in a better position than Republicans are today, and still the Tea Party and the Republicans were able to stop a lot of the initiatives from the Obama administration.
Virtually everything. I mean, he had 74 days with a filibuster-proof Senate, and that was it. I mean, everything that happened in 8 years happened in those 74 days for all practical purposes.
Yeah, and this time around, Trump does not have a mandate. He didn't win the popular vote, and the Republicans don't know. They have to do something on the ACA because they've been saying they're going to do something about it for 7 years, and yet they don't have an alternative plan. They don't really have a plan, and so we think that we are in a stronger position today than they were, 8 years ago.
We're talking with Angel Padilla, a member of the Indivisible team. They are the authors of Indivisible: A Practical Guide for Resisting Trump, which you can find at indivisibleguide.com. Indivisible. Not invisible, indivisible,
yes.
Not dividable.
Yeah.
Indivisible. We are together.
And that's key, right? We have to think of this as an attack on one as an attack on all. And that's why we also don't have a particular policy agenda. It's basically stop the Trump agenda, right? And so that's why we bring a lot of different people with a lot of different interests. And we recognize that in order to win, and we think we can win, we have to stick together. So if you care about immigrant rights, that's great. That's something that we want to work on. But if you also care about the environment or reproductive rights, those are all progressive values that we support, and we want to work together to make sure that we stop rolling those things back.
So, for example, Bernie Sanders, the Our Revolution group, they sent out an email yesterday saying that Bernie was introducing an amendment today that would require Congress to keep Donald Trump's campaign promises to not cut Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid. And, apparently he's introducing this today, and there was a toll-free number you can call in and, let your member of the Senate know that you believe that. Now, that's an actual specific policy thing. Does that go in a somewhat different direction than what you're talking about?
A little bit, just because when we think about the way that we can influence our representatives is, okay. And again, we don't specify we should be reaching out to Democrats or Republicans. It's all members of Congress, right? You have 3 representatives, right? 2 senators and 1 member of Congress.
Unless you live in D.C.
It's true. And I do.
Yeah.
But you have 3 representatives in Congress, and you need to let them know what you value, right? What you want them to be voting for and voting against. And so there's 2 parts to this, right? There's making sure that Republicans and that are supporting the Trump agenda don't get away with what they're trying to do, but then also Democrats aren't caving on these issues, right? So I mean, there were reports about, for example, Democrats willing to negotiate on the ACA. Right? It's like, what are you going to negotiate on, right? I mean,
the Republicans are not going to give you the public option. Sorry.
Exactly.
Ain't going to happen.
So what we want to do is, and as we write in the guide, is we want to stiffen their spine, right? And we had a really great a group out of San Francisco, an Indivisible chapter in San Francisco, that went to Pelosi's office with a styrofoam spine that they presented to the office because we want, because the idea, we want to stiffen the spines of Democrats.
That's great. A guy named Bill Moyer, not the Bill Moyers, but Bill, it started this thing called the Backbone Campaign back during the George W. Bush presidency, and the same kind of thing. So the Indivisible Guide, Chapter 1, how grassroots advocacy worked to stop Obama, and I think you've kind of described that. Chapter 2, how your member of Congress thinks and how to use that to save democracy. You know, my sense of it is that, you know, most members of Congress wake up every morning thinking, I got to raise $10,000 today. That's the first thought in their head.
Yeah, well, so that's true. I mean, their primary concern is reelection, and they need money to get reelected, but they also need voters to come out for them, you know, every 2 years if they're in the House. And so what we're trying to say is, you know, your member of Congress, your representative, cares about whether or not you're going to vote for them. And that's their concern. If you are not a constituent, he doesn't or she doesn't really care, right? So even in the last few days, I've gotten a ton of alerts about, you know, contact Speaker Ryan, tell him not to repeal the ACA. You know, but if you're not his constituent, why he's going to move forward with his agenda, right? He's only going to listen to his constituents.
In other words, if you don't live in Janesville, Wisconsin, he's not going to take he's not going to pay attention to your call or your email. And in fact, a lot of members of Congress, I've noticed that they've redone their websites so that if you don't have a zip code that's in their congressional district, you just cannot hit the send button.
Yeah, and we've also seen, even as these individual groups have popped up, they've been posting on members of Congress's website, and they've been deleted. The members of Congress have been deleting those posts because they're afraid, you know, and they should be. That's the point, that no member of Congress should be secure, should feel secure, right? Every 2 years, if you're in the House, you're facing re-election, and if you're not voting consistent with the values of your constituents.
So we have a situation right now where I get people calling into the program all the time who are saying, you know, okay, I just called, you know, these 5 members of Congress, or I call, you know, whatever, and you know, they're not being taken as seriously because they don't live in those districts. So we've got a small number of very active activists in this country, and what we need is who are focusing on a fairly broad spectrum of politicians, and we need to flip that upside down so that we've got a broad number of activists who are each individually focusing on basically 3 politicians. They're 2 senators and they're a member of the House.
Exactly.
That's it.
And yes, and you know, we're obviously in favor of, you know, if you want to do more and be active in different ways, that's great. But if you want to make the biggest difference, you focus on your 3 members of Congress, and you can do that from your neighborhood back wherever you live. You don't have to come to Washington to do it. You can go down to the district, ask for a meeting. You know, if you're facing, you know, this Congress taking away your health care, why not ask your member to hold a town hall and explain to you as a constituent why they're voting to repeal?
Bernie once on this program, somebody called up and said, you know, how can I get my congressman to do so and so? And Bernie said, go to your local school and library and see if they got a room you can rent. He said, typically they're free. And if they're not free, they're cheap. You know, find a public facility where you can get a room, rent the room, you know, put it a month out or so that it's reasonable planning. And create the event. Announce that the event is going to be about, we're going to talk about Social Security or whatever. I mean, pick a topic or a couple of topics, and put together a flyer. And on the flyer say, and Dan Coates, our representative, will be there or has been invited. Has been invited. And distribute those in the district. And of course, reach out to that member of Congress and say, you know, hey, through their local offices, this has to be a locally driven thing. Say, hey, we're putting on the party. We'd like you to come. Is that what you're talking about?
Exactly. And the member might not care if it's here in D.C., but if it's down in their district, they don't want to seem like they don't have the time to go meet with their constituents, right?
Yeah, they all know what happened to Eric. What's his name? Say what? Yeah, Eric Cantor. Pardon me. Thank you.
Yeah. No, but that's right. It's acting locally and getting in, making them make the case to you as their constituent at the local level.
Yeah, there you go. And then finally, you write about 4 local advocacy tactics that actually work. What are those?
So the things that we saw that worked were town hall events. We all remember back when the ACA was being debated in Congress. Members went back to the district in August, and they were overwhelmed by these, you know, Tea Party groups at town halls. That was super effective at sort of making them listen, right? So the things that we saw work were, you know, town halls, coordinated calls, right? I mean, getting a bunch of your friends walking and making a ton of calls to the office really does.
Especially the local offices.
Oh, well, actually, we think that it's probably more effective to call the DC office because that's where the policy people
work. Oh, interesting. So call 202-225-3121, which is the switchboard for Congress. And if you are not even sure who represents you, give them your zip code and they'll tell you and they'll connect you with that person.
Exactly. And honestly, if you're going to call the district office, call the DC office. They both matter. But the policy people work in D.C., and so they're the ones who are going to know what's going on in Congress and what you're talking about.
That's good to know.
And then go down to the office and have a meeting. Ask for a meeting. Ask to meet with the congressman, congresswoman. If they're not there, then meet with the staffer. Right. And we offer a sample, script that you can use when you go down there.
Yeah. And is that for?
Oh, and then there's the sit-ins. There's always an option of sit-ins. Again, it's what we want to see and what we think works is you as a local member of their community going down and making yourself heard, right? And if that means going down and having a sit-in, that might be what works.
So nonviolent passive resistance and wouldn't you add to that, try to turn it into a media event?
Oh, and definitely always document it. Yes. What was super important and what we saw with the Tea Party is that they always had video and they were always broadcasting it as far as they could. And we've already been able to see some of that, even with the groups that have been using this guide. We had a group that went down to Goodlot's district office and they recorded it.
Goodlot, yeah.
Yes. And this is following that ethics debacle last week. And they recorded themselves going. They invited news cameras and news cameras came by and they recorded and it was all over the press. It was really effective at shining a spotlight on what's happening with that member.
Right. And how did Goodlot respond?
Well, he wasn't there. But they met with the staff, which
but he knew about it, right?
Yeah, of course. He was on Rachel Maddow.
Yeah. Oh, trying to do damage control.
Oh no, I mean they played that video.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Oh, even better.
Yeah,
even better. Angel Angel?
Yeah, that works.
Angel Padilla, member of the Indivisible team, co-author of Indivisible, a practical guide for resisting Trump. Indivisibleguide.com is the website, and Indivisible team at Indivisible team.
One last thing, we have a directory up and running. So if you are interested and you want to see if there's a group near you, you can put in your zip code and see if there's a group near you.
Cool. Great. Angel Padilla, thank you so much for being with us. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Dave, watching Free Speech TV in Denver, Colorado. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind? And thanks for being a first-time caller.
You betcha. You talked earlier about John Dean's book, Conservatives Without Conscience.
Right.
Yeah, and a great book it is. But he's referring to a professor of Manitoba University named Robert Altemeyer's work.
Yes. He bases the entire book on Altemeyer's work.
Yeah, and Altemeyer's book is available online. I think your listeners should know that. It's a great read. Okay.
It's not as accessible though as John Dean's. I mean, I haven't read both word for word, but I have both books.
Oh, you should read The Authoritarians. It's very frightening. Professor Altemeyer traces the development of people from newborns and their reaction to light and sound.
Yep.
Determining later political preferences and their acceptance of the authoritarian models.
Through the mediating effect of cortisol and other hormones that are associated with fear, shock, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it seems to be a consistent 25-26% of the populace that is amenable to this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Which sort of matches Republican voter registration in my mind.
Yeah, actually, you're right.
Yeah. Well, if you look at like fact-checking and stuff, there's a consistent 25% that seems comfortable with, Trumpian nonsense, I guess I'd call it, sort of thing. So,
well, then,
the same people all the time.
Right, and let's not forget, there are authoritarians on both sides. It's just authoritarians in the Democratic Party tend to get thrown out of their butt, but Huey Long was an authoritarian. The whole Soviet Union thing was arguably hyper-left authoritarian, although I would say actually it was far-right authoritarianism. But,
at some point the left-right distinction doesn't make any sense in authoritarian, totalitarian systems. But anyway, I just wanted your listeners to know they can read Altemeyer's book online. They should. It'll terrify them and educate them. So.
And that's The Authoritarians is the title of that book. And
yes, it is.
Is it just like online on a website, you mean, or you can get the Kindle version kind of thing?
if you'll just, well, I suppose you can. I know I have a hard copy of it myself, so. But in which he self-published. I think it's been out of print now for a while, but it's available. But if you Google it, you'll find it on Amazon, I'm sure.
Right.
I think that's where I got it. But I know you can read it online for nothing. So.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, he's been dead for a while, hasn't he, Altemeyer?
Yeah, I think so. But he did like 60 years worth of work on folks, tracing them from newborns to political attitudes in their 60s. You know, so.
Yeah.
And remarkably consistent percentages, and very disturbing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay.
One of the other reasons why the Kochs are funding Generation Opportunity, an outreach to young people, to high school students, get them when they're young. Now, I realize Altemeyer's, there are a lot of other variables and factors here, but influencing.
Yeah. Although he seems awfully deterministic when you read his book. I mean, it seems like there are people that certain percentage is locked in and they stay there.
Right, but the point is, if they have an authoritarian follower type personality, and you come at them with an authoritarian right-wing message or an authoritarian left-wing message, you can capture them. And so the authoritarian right-wingers are out there reaching out for them. The authoritarian left-wingers are by and large, ignored and laughed at, it seems. But anyhow, Dave, thanks for the call. Excellent point, and thank you very much. We'll be back. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Welcome back. Keith in Sherwood, Wisconsin, you wanted to speak to the topic of our last guest.
Yeah, it's kind of exciting what the individual group is doing, Tom. And I wanted to add something to that, kind of an idea. It's kind of quick. And I've always believed all along that it doesn't make sense to not to try to call representatives outside your district. So what I'm suggesting is kind of a phone a friend type approach, which is sit down and think about maybe 10 or more people that you know, friends, relatives, who live outstate, particularly in red districts. And when an issue comes up and you want to have those other congressional offices or state legislative offices contacted, shoot an email out to those friends and have them do it.
That's a great suggestion. It's a sort of a variation on the old phone tree thing. That's a great suggestion. Keith, thank you for that. And thanks for listening to WCPT. It's 28 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls, my thoughts, the news of the day, and as we dig through my still inch-thick stack of paper here. Stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
More of your calls in just a moment. Paul Krugman says that, yes, the white working class is about to be betrayed. The evidence of that coming betrayal is obvious in the choice of an array of pro-corporate, anti-labor figures for particular positions, key positions. In particular, the most important story of the week, seriously, people, stop focusing on Trump's Twitter. was the selection of Tom Price, an ardent opponent of Obamacare and advocate of Medicare privatization, as Secretary of HHS, Health and Human Services. This choice probably means that the Affordable Care Act is doomed, and Mr. Trump's most enthusiastic supporters will be among the biggest losers. Yes. And then he says, the first thing you need to understand here is that Republican talk of repeal and replace has always been a fraud. The GOP has had 6 years claiming it'll come up with a replacement for Obamacare any day now. The reason why it hasn't delivered is because it can't. Now, let me add to this. The reason why the Republicans have not been able to offer an alternative to Obamacare is because Obamacare was the original Republican plan. This is what Richard Nixon proposed in 1972, back when we had real news in the United States. And Teddy Kennedy fought. And then the Heritage Foundation in the early 1980s, at the beginning of the Reagan administration, I believe it was, came out with a working paper on this and said, here's how to do it. Mitt Romney tried it in Massachusetts, and it was relatively successful. He tried it in 2000. He ran for president on it in 2004, or he intended to. By that time, though, Obamacare had passed and it had become radioactive, and so he was trying to, oh no, I didn't do that, you know, but he did. I mean, it was that's the Republican program. The Democratic program is Medicare. Give Medicare to everybody. But the Democratic program couldn't get through, given the current Congress we had. So this is what President Obama put together, was basically the Republican program. Speaking of when we actually had news in this country, have you heard anybody breaking down any of these pieces of legislation lately? Back in 1972, when Richard Nixon proposed Obamacare, Daniel Schorr went on CBS News. Daniel Schorr has since passed away. Lamar and I had a wonderful lunch with him here in Washington, D.C. back, 20 years ago. When we were writing our first book on the JFK assassination, Daniel Schorr had some fascinating information for us. What an amazing guy and a great journalist. But this is how journalism used to be done in the United States. This is a clip from CBS back from the day. You can find this floating around YouTube. Here it is.
The administration proposal would provide different plans for 4 categories of Americans. For 150 million working people and their families, employers would be required to buy health insurance providing a basic package of benefits, eventually they paying 3/4 of the premiums.
This is number
one. For some 20 million of the working poor and their families, the current free Medicaid services would be replaced by private health insurance fully paid by the government for the poorest, with a sliding scale of contributions for families earning more than $3,000.
That's number 2, the second part of it.
For the 21 million aging Americans, the $5.60 monthly Medicare premium for optional doctor services would be dropped. Social Security taxes adjusted to make up the cost.
That's part 3.
For some 30 million domestic, self-employed, and others, lower costs by being enabled to buy policies at group rates from insurance pools.
Sound like Obamacare?
Deductions, co-insurance features. The plan is estimated to cover less than half of the average patient's health expenses and to cost the federal government less than $2 billion in addition to what it's now paying. By contrast, the Kennedy plan would cover an estimated 70% of health expenses through a system that would cost the government up to $60 billion, but including a lot of what patients are now paying. The Kennedy bill is straight national health insurance, financed by Social Security
the Kennedy
and
bill
general
was single-payer
taxes,
health insurance.
with no cost sharing, no cutoff point for the beneficiaries, bypassing private insurance companies operating through a presidentially appointed health security board. And so the line is being drawn between repairs on the present health system and a new federal health system. The debate starts next Monday, when Welfare Secretary Richardson is scheduled to appear at the opening of hearings of the Senate Health Subcommittee. The chairman of that subcommittee now, Senator Kennedy.
There you go. And then he goes to Kennedy and he gives a speech. And there's another one out there too where Walter Cronkite is breaking the thing down. I mean, there's a couple of them where they're breaking it down because that's what news used to do. And then in the 80s, during the Reagan administration, keep in mind this was 72, and then in the 1980s during the Reagan administration, whenever any news media came out and said, hey, Ronald Reagan just lied to you, these are not facts, things like that, then you had this whole media infrastructure that was funded by these very, very wealthy families, by the Coors family and by the Bradley Foundation, the Bradley family, and a lot of them now they're just foundations because the founders are dead, but they were live, live and kicking back then. And they were funding groups like, Brent Bozell's group, which I think was ACT, something like that, Accuracy in Media, AIM, AIM. And they would just yell and scream, oh, my God, Daniel Schorr, how dare he, blah, 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 blah. And this was a strategy that was called working the refs. You work the referees. You hassle the referees to the point where they just finally give in and say, all right already. And that's what our media did, is they said, all right already. We're tired of fighting with you right-wingers about what's factual and what's not. We'll just stop talking about facts.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Can't catch the show live? Want to listen when it's convenient for you? Well, you're in luck. You can find the Thom Hartmann Program podcast without commercials over at thomhartmann.com.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Really interesting. Why would we vote against Jeff Sessions? Why should you call your member of Congress, 202-225-3121, your member of the Senate? This is only the Senate. This is not the House of Representatives. Cabinet appointments have to pass advice and consent of the Senate, according to the Constitution. Why Jeff Sessions? Well, obviously, he was the first senator to support Donald Trump. That in and of itself should tell you something. But secondly, and I haven't seen this in the hearings. I'm not sure if this was brought up in the hearings, frankly. I'd be surprised if it wasn't, but you just never know, is that Jeff Sessions has, come out and spoken out against medical marijuana and or any kind of marijuana for that matter. And in fact, there's a great little piece that talks about this issue. How, right now, in every state where there is medical marijuana, there are people who are breaking federal law, even though they're complying with state law, by buying, consuming, transporting, selling medical marijuana. And in a bunch of states now, there's people doing it with just legal recreational marijuana. And Jeff Sessions, if he decided he wanted to, could say, Loretta Lynch and Eric Holder chose not to prosecute the federal marijuana laws, but in opposition to the states that had decriminalized it. But we're going to go after them. And as much of a libertine as Donald Trump was throughout his life, he's also a prude. He's also a frightened conservative. He's a germaphobe. He hates to touch people. He hates to shake hands. He's famously a germaphobe. And he also is famously unwilling to use anything that alters his consciousness. He doesn't drink alcohol. He says he's never smoked pot. I believe he doesn't drink coffee. Him and Mitt Romney have that in common. Mitt Romney does it because he's a Mormon. Donald Trump does it, I think, because he's a control freak or because he knows that he's 16 thousandths of an inch away from being out of control, and he's, scared to death what might happen if he indulges in something. But some serious stuff, bad stuff could come out of this. Just a few other things I wanted to share with you real quickly. Senators Warren and Murray, Patty Murray and Elizabeth Warren, are hosting a forum with workers mistreated by Mr. Puzder. Mr. Puzder is going to be, if Donald Trump has his way and the Republicans in the Senate go along with it, is going to be our labor secretary. He's the guy who runs the company that runs Carl's Jr. and Hardee's, who runs the ads of, it started out with the Paris Hilton ad in a bikini washing a car while she's eating a burger. And now it's some other famous, attractive young woman in a bikini. And he's like, hey, I like half-naked women eating burgers. And it turns out that some incredible percentage of his employees have been sexually harassed, well over half. And so anyhow, that they want what Elizabeth Warren and Patty Murray, Senator Murray from Washington State, are calling for is for the victims or witnesses with knowledge of Puzder's business practices to be allowed to testify at his confirmation hearings. And today at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, that'll be in an hour and a half, Senator Elizabeth Warren and Health, Education, Labor and Pensions Ranking Member Patty Murray of Washington will host a forum with witnesses who can provide information on Department of Labor nominee Andrew Puzder, including fast food workers at Puzder's businesses and employment experts. Last Thursday, 23 senators wrote a letter to Chairman Alexander, the committee chairman, requesting that Puzder's nomination hearing include witnesses who could provide the committee with information about Mr. Puzder's business practices and his treatment of workers. Chairman Alexander promptly rejected the request of the other 23 senators. This is not, how do you say, behaving in good faith. It's just not. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's on your mind today?
Yes, Professor, let me get you off of this speaker. Listen, I know you're writing a book, but I need for you to put together Yellow Pages, a directory of activists. You've got about 3,000 to 4,000 people that have come on your show. All you got to do is list their website, their webpage, or whatnot. The title of your book is going to be Democracy, Tag You're It, with you on the cover along with your lovely wife. And the proceeds will go to fund the number one disease that we have in our country, and that would be ignorance. So I need you to get this done, Professor, by the end of the year so we can identify our 435 congressmen that are going to be running for office in 2018. Now, Mr. Sanders sent me a...
Morris, if I may interrupt you, it's already done. The guests that we have on the program, we chronicle, we archive on our website over at thomhartmann.com. In fact, Sue has put together a lot of transcripts of our conversations with them that are also available over there. And, any books that we talk about, any people we talk about. And it's also in the newsletter that Sue Nethercutt puts together. And if you drop into our live chat room, it's free. It's over at thomhartmann.com. She can connect you with all that information. But it's easy to find also just on our website. Back to you, Morris.
That's why they call you the professor. But anyway, Our Revolution sent me a thing, too. There's a governor, not a governor, but a mayor running in Atlanta. I can't vote for him, but there's a man running for a mayor in Atlanta that Bernie Sanders is supporting. And, man, I'm digging the heck out of that. One of the qualifying guidelines is the guy has been busted at a protest. And the 435 people that are going to run in 2018, one of the things that they got to have on their resume is, I have been arrested. I have participated in a protest somewhere. Then we know they're with us, Professor.
There you go.
Thank you for taking my call.
There you go. As someone who has been through that routine, I agree with you, Morris. Morris, thank you. It's always great to hear from you. Kelly in Lake Havasu City, Arizona. Hey, Kelly, what's on your mind today?
Well, I just wanted to call in, Tom, and let you know that you are very inspirational. I am now an appointed precinct person.
Great.
I'll be going to my... Yes, I will be going to my precinct meeting tomorrow. And by coincidence, with the Indivisible Hand Guide, and one of your previous I had to call in because one of your previous callers nailed exactly what I'm going to bring up at the meeting, which is I want everybody to get 10 friends, no matter where they live, and be able to set up a system so that you can call or text when phone calls are needed to be made to members of Congress.
Right.
And I think that if you start a group with 10 and you take a month or two and persist in it, and then have every person in that group add a person somewhere down the line and just keep growing our numbers.
Right. Yeah, the power of compounded interest, as it were, geometric progression is extraordinary. If you even got 3 people, and each one of those 3 people got 3 people, and each one of those 3 people got 3 people, within 6 or 8 iterations, you'd have pretty much everybody in the country. It doesn't take an enormous number of people. Excuse me?
I already have my 10.
Oh, that's great.
I'm going to the meeting with my cup full, so to speak, and I'm hoping that the other members of the party will also participate.
That's marvelous. That's marvelous. Good on you, Kelly. Thanks a lot for the call. Thanks for sharing an inspirational story with us. I appreciate it. Rich in Greenwood, Indiana. Hey, Rich, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Thank you. I wanted to bring attention to a couple of resources and then ask you a question about the paper that you were citing by Professor Turchin. Amazing Grace is a song that we all know, more or less, And there was a movie back in 2006 that I'm looking at my notes here. It's about the abolition of slavery in Great Britain. William Wilberforce and William Pitt.
Yeah, it was in 1838, wasn't it?
Hey, is it 38? Okay.
That's my recollection. I could be wrong, but it's been a long time. But yeah,
oh,
it was in the early 1800s. It was after the American Revolution and before the American Civil War.
This movie is a wonderful period piece that gave me an understanding that I never had on the background of that song as being a song of abolition. It was written by a slave ship captain, John Newton, who's portrayed in the film by Albert Finney. He does great characters.
Yeah.
And I just urge everybody to check it out because Amazing Grace, that saved a wretch like me, I was blind, but now I see, is talking about the inhumanity of slavery.
That's right.
It's not about personal enlightenment and finding the Lord. It's about recognizing the sin of slavery.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and it's brilliant. This is a new movie or an old movie, Rich?
2006.
Okay, and the name of the movie is Amazing Grace?
Correct. It was on HBO recently, so it's going to be on HBO Go.
Huh, that's great. Okay, Rich, thanks a lot for the heads up on that. That's fascinating stuff, and you're absolutely spot on correct. And it's a beautiful, beautiful song, no matter what. But with that backstory, it becomes even more meaningful. Thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see. Vera in Seattle, Washington, watching on Free Speech TV. Hey, Vera, what's on your mind?
Hi. My doctor told me I shouldn't watch any news because it makes my blood pressure go up, so I try to get it from other people. But the thing that I wanted to say, I have a caregiver. Most of my caregivers have been from Ethiopia. Most of these people here, I know I hear what the people down there, the coal country people, and the people in those kind of areas. These people come here, they don't speak English that well. Most of them that work for me, not only do they have one job, each person in their family has two jobs. And a lot of the people, the Spanish people here, at least here in Washington State and other places, they start their own business, they have their own companies. And what I'm wondering is these people can come here from other places and make money, and then the people in the coal countries can't make any money, and they don't go back to school. I'm trying to figure out what is the difference between them and the other people. Because like my daughter, since Mr. Trump is in office, she has 2 degrees. She's going back to school to get 2 more degrees. And the reason she's doing this, she's going to make herself so open to any kind of job that's out here. She'll be able to have a job no matter what, because the jobs that she's in, they're going to always need somebody in those jobs.
Right.
So what I'm wondering is, people want jobs and you need jobs, you should go back to school and get education.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Vera, in answer, 2 thoughts apropos of what you've said. First of all, there's an enormous body of research on what's called the immigrant phenomena. And, going back hundreds of years and looking at European immigrants within Europe and immigrants into the United States and other countries. And immigrants tend to, in the first generation anyway, and sometimes the second generation, tend to outperform native-born people in terms of entrepreneurialism and achievement. And it seems that there's just kind of a psychology associated with, hey, I'm here, I've got a fresh opportunity, I've got a fresh start, it's a new place, the sky's the limit, right? So that's, I think, part of the answer to your question. But the other thing about the coal country folks is what astonishes me. I mean, Ronald Reagan started this whole meme in 1980 about the welfare queen, this woman who drove her Cadillac to get her 100 different welfare checks all around New York City every day. And, of course, he completely made her up. The New York Times spent, years looking for her, and it was just a fiction. But, in Reagan's telling of the story, of course, she was black. And the Republicans for the last 30, 40 years have demonized people of color by characterizing them as people on welfare. And, of course, the implication of that is that, therefore, they're lazy, fill in the blank. But the reality in the United States is that the vast majority of people on welfare are white people. The vast majority of people in the United States who are not moving up or moving out are white people. The coal country that we were talking about, that you mentioned, for case in point. And poverty, despair, lack of opportunity, destruction of local economies. Certainly, there's a big problem in the communities of color as a consequence of institutional racism in the United States. But it is a larger part of a larger problem created by the financialization of our economy and the way that the top 1% have basically stolen everything. Vera, I got to run, but thanks for the call. Great to hear from you. Welcome back. 10 minutes before the hour. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. Our report today brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and free-don.org. And Patrick Gavin is on the line with us. Hey, Patrick, what's up?
Hey, how are you?
Good. So what's happening in the world today?
Well, obviously everyone's paying attention to what's happening with Jeff Sessions and his Senate confirmation hearing. I think so far he's probably doing exactly what he wants to be doing, which is to say the right things to appease people who are inclined not to support him. He came out very upfront in his opening statement and addressed some of the hot topic issues about race and about the Ku Klux Klan that he anticipated to get, and did his best to assure.
Well, there were demonstrators dressed as Klan members that opened the open.
Yes. Yes, and I think
Pardon the interruption.
Even as he pointed out, that it was in his interest that they kind of got it out of the way early, so that he could continue unabated.
Yeah, I have a question about this, because I have not been able to watch most of it. He has the exact statement, as I recall, that Jeff Sessions made was, "Good people don't smoke marijuana," and as Attorney General, he will have the power to direct federal agencies, federal law enforcement agencies, to go into the homes of medical marijuana users, recreational marijuana users in states where the states have legalized it, shut down dispensaries, shut down growers, and throw millions of people, literally millions of Americans, in prison for decades if he chooses to. Was that issue brought up?
That issue has not been brought up so far, to the best of my knowledge. I think that to your point, though, what I think a lot of people are trying to tease out are how Senator Sessions separates his personal views from what he plans on doing as Attorney General. For instance, during the campaign, he said he would support, and he said he still supports looking into Hillary Clinton's email server. But he said during this hearing that because of his personal views, that he would recuse himself from any of those cases.
Well, he's been doing a little weaseling on this too. I mean, one of the parts that I saw of this had to do with the Dreamers, and 800,000 young people who were not born in this country but were raised in this country and really know nothing other than this country. And they asked him, "What are you going to do about this? As Attorney General, you have the power to go out and arrest all these people," and the Obama administration has chosen not to. And his answer was essentially, Obama did that by executive order. That doesn't make it the law of the land. Whatever you guys here in Congress pass as a law, I will enforce. Well, the law right now is arrest him and throw him out of the country. And I didn't hear him say anything other than that's what he would do. Except he said it in a very, very vague way that I think for anybody for whom this was not a hot button issue might have completely missed.
Yes, and I think that was his same tact on abortion, where he's obviously pro-life, but he said that, look, Roe v. Wade is the law of the land, and he wouldn't do much to try to change that. For better, for worse, probably worse. The goal here is probably not to shed too much light on what he would do as Attorney General. The goal is to get confirmed for him. And so for you to astutely pick up that he's being Weasley would not surprise anybody. I think most people in these confirmation hearings, Republican and Democrat, probably are. I think that his main goal right here is to do as little damage as possible, which is why I think he came out and addressed some of those hot topics right out of the gate. Unlike some other nominees, both present and past, he benefits from not only being a senator, but a really well-liked one, too, on both sides of the aisle. So barring any major catastrophe today, and I think we expect it to continue into tomorrow, I think that that his confirmation, while it may be close, is probably a sure thing at this point.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. So what else is up, Patrick?
We are still seeing more debate, sort of in the back rooms while everyone's paying attention to the hearings about really the sort of Republican interwar over Obamacare. The Republican Party is not in lockstep at all on this. We've heard recent reports that in fact they're trying to sort of lay the ground. The congressional Republicans are trying to lay the groundwork to try to find a way to repeal Obamacare, regardless of what their man in the White House wants to do. Chances are that there's very little likelihood at this point that all Republicans are going to be in lockstep on this. And so even though we kind of view the next 100 days as potentially a war between Republicans and Democrats, the reality is I think most congressional observers are trying to figure out what's going to happen both within the Republican caucus on Capitol Hill and then also how President-elect Donald Trump would handle that. There were some reports this morning that anonymous congressional Republicans sort of are worried that Trump is going to begin to be sort of like an Arnold Schwarzenegger Republican, meaning campaigning more to the right, but then governing more to the center or even left of center on some instances. And so Obamacare will, once these nominations are out of the way, Obamacare will dominate activity on Capitol Hill. And what's going to happen might surprise people. It's not necessarily going to be this total repudiation.
I agree, and I'll give you two quick reasons why. Number one, Donald Trump, particularly in the Republican primaries, campaigned as a Democrat. He said, I'm not going to touch your Social Security, I'm not going to touch your Medicare, and I'm not going to touch Medicaid. Republicans all want to strip these things. I'm not going to. We've got a whole montage of him saying that over and over and over and over again on the campaign stump. And so that's going to be, him running as a Democrat, that's going to be a war in the Republican Party. And then he also said during the campaign, and Bernie Sanders pointed this out in an email today, that he wants everybody in the United States to have health care, right? And in fact, 16 years ago, he was supporting single-payer health care. So, again, he's kind of campaigning as a Democrat. But the third thing, the big problem that the Republicans have is that Obamacare is the Republican alternative. It was introduced in 1972 by Richard Nixon. Ted Kennedy shot it down because he wanted single payer instead, but it was virtually identical to Obamacare. The Heritage Foundation tweaked the hell out of it and rolled it out in the 1980s and said, here's the program. Mitt Romney took it and put it into place as Romney Care in Massachusetts in 2000, thinking that that would be his door to the White House in 2004 because it would be so successful. And he, he tried to run on it. It kind of blew up in his face. But Obamacare is the Republican alternative. It's a free market system that uses the for-profit insurance companies. And so how can the Republicans come up with an alternative to what has been their own plan for 50 years?
Right. I think, as you pointed out, stripping away Obamacare would probably be the easy part, even though that it would not be easy at all. It's what do you replace it with? Republicans know, as you noted, both financially and politically, that they do have to replace it with something, and that's where the real rubber is going to hit the road. Is even if they can find agreement on what exactly to strip away from Obamacare, that's the easy part. The hard part is going to getting all these heads on board.
Yeah. My prediction, Patrick, is that they are going to do some legislative sleight of hand, basically take the Affordable Care Act, rename it as something else, and then rename that as Trump Care, but it functionally will be the exact same thing, and declare victory and go home.
That would probably be right, and what a political system we would have if that actually happened.
Amen. Patrick Gavin with Talk Media News. Thanks, Patrick.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeats.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Our book today is Walking Your Blues Away, How to Heal the Mind and Create Emotional Well-Being. And we're reading, starting on page 2 in the introduction. The human body is a self-healing organism. When you cut your finger, it heals. If you break your leg, it heals. Even if part of you is cut out in surgery, the surgeon's wound heals. We heal from bacterial and viral invasions, from injuries, from all variety of traumas. The mechanisms of healing are built into us. 5 million years of evolution or the grace of God or both have made our bodies automatic healing machines. So why wouldn't the same be true of our minds and our emotions? All of the traumas that we experience in life leave their wounds. If humankind hadn't had ways of healing from those emotional and psychological blows, over time society would have become progressively less functional. Instead, history shows us that people usually recover from even the most severe psychological wounds, often learning great lessons or gaining important insights in the recovery process. The famous Hawaii longitudinal study of children raised in stressful, disadvantaged conditions, they were migrant farm workers, found that a higher percentage of the children grew up to be highly resilient than did a middle-class control group. The generation that survived the Great Depression and the Nazi Holocaust in Europe went on to create important social institutions, build nations, and offer comfort and hope to humankind. Elie Wiesel's experience specifically comes to mind, although he never would have wished on another the horrific experience of being in one of Hitler's death camps. Through his writing of that experience, he has given a particularly inspiring model of resilience and healing to the world. The reality is that although adversity breaks some people, it strengthens others. And when people heal from adversity, the old cliche of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger usually rings true. But just as with the production of scar tissue in the healing of a wound to the skin, a process involving millions of cells producing very specific compounds in response to the trauma in the tissue, there must be an inborn mechanism for healing the mind and the emotions. And just as healing from a cut can be speeded up by keeping the wound dry, or can be slowed down by letting the wound get wet or dirty and irritated, this emotional healing is also a process that can be either stimulated or thwarted by our interventions. In this book, I've identified a specific healing mechanism and process that nature has built into the human mind and body that enables us to process trauma in a way that is quick, functional, and permanent. Just like the skin's mechanism for forming scabs and scars and eventually even making the scars vanish, this mechanism is simple, fundamental, and elegant. In its simplest form, this mechanism involves rhythmic side-to-side stimulation of the body. The side-to-side motion, or bilateral motion, causes nerve impulses to cross the brain from the left hemisphere to the right hemisphere and back at a specific rate or frequency. This cross-patterning produces an organic integration of left hemispheric thinking functions with right hemisphere and brainstem feeling functions. This integration is a necessary precursor to emotional and intellectual healing from trauma. This steady movement of nerve impulses across the hemispheres of the brain is stimulated by the bilateral movement processes of a variety of modern forms of psychotherapy, such as eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, also known as EMDR, emotional freedom technique, and thought field therapy. In its purest form, however, I've discovered that the natural and rhythmic left-right process of walking while performing a simple mental exercise can also stimulate the same internal integration process. This, I posit, is the way humans have healed themselves for trauma for the hundreds of thousands of years of human history. And it's only because so few of us walk anymore that we have to resort to office-based psychotherapeutic processes to produce a similar result. And that result is impressive. When we stimulate the nervous system in this bilateral manner while calling to mind a persistent emotional distress, the emotional charge associated with that memory quickly and permanently dissipates. This isn't a process of producing amnesia or forgetting. Instead, it's a way of reframing the past, a way of re-understanding or putting into context what has been so unnerving to us. When we perform this bilateral process correctly, the pictures of painful past events in our memory transforms from stark, scary, sound-filled color movies into black and white still pictures that are flattened out and lose their sound. The internal dialogue we have about the events, the tagline that we tell ourselves, and actually hear in our own heads and in our own voices, changes. Usually from something like, that was a painful experience that still scares me, or I was victimized in that relationship, to a more productive synopsis, such as, yes, that happened to me, but it's well in the past now, and I've learned some good lessons from the experience. I can now let go of it. Inciting the movement of nerve impulses across the brain's hemispheres helps people come to terms with their past. They stop being frightened by their imagined futures and feel comfortable and empowered in the present. Walking while holding a traumatic memory in mind in a particular way can produce this result in a very short time. And the book goes on to talk about how exactly to use simple walking, just going out for a 20-minute walk, which is physically good for you. Use that simple walking and combine it with a very specific set of mental exercises that Sigmund Freud and Franz Anton Mesmer and others first discovered years ago. Walking your blues away.
Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights.
From studios underwritten in part by Sputnik Radio, this is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and I'm very pleased to have on the line with us Paul David Kemener and Jr. and Marilee Jacobs. Paul is the director, and Paul and Marilee are the co-producers of a movie, Eating You Alive. You can find it at eatingyoualive.com, and it's a pretty amazing piece of documentary filmmaking. First of all, Paul and Marilee, welcome to the program.
Hey, Tom, how are you doing?
Great. Thanks for joining us. So why are more Americans sick and dying than ever before, outside of the fact that our population's larger than ever before? But, on a per capita basis, why are we getting sicker?
Because of the food that we eat. It's that simple.
Okay. For example?
Yeah, go ahead, Marilee.
I think, for example, we've just become so... as a culture, I guess, so used to just eating all the things that to us taste so good and that, frankly, we're addicted to. So lots of processed foods, the standard American diet, meat at every meal, and your dessert at every meal, and the coffee and snacks and, snacky foods and energy bars and all those kinds of things in between. And somehow we've gotten to think that eating this way doesn't have really any effect on our health, when in fact it is the key component to why we have disease and illness and ultimately death.
Yeah. As a lifelong, more or less, vegetarian and health food nut, I've watched lots of documentaries and shows on this, and I'm pretty sure yours was the one where the fellow was like, he threw away his diabetic medication, didn't need that anymore. I mean, tell us, if you could, a couple of the stories that people will find at eatingyoualive.com.
Well, I think one that's, basically more of an obesity-related story, but amazing. A guy named Mylan Ross. He went from a 60-inch waist to a 30-inch waist, and he didn't do it for weight loss. But he literally had hypertension. He was diabetic. He reversed all of that literally within less than 2 years. All the weight situation went away in 2 years. The diabetes went away in weeks. But then we have other stories of a gentleman by the name of Greg Clapp, who had heart disease. He had a stroke. His mind basically had gone back, his wife said, to that about a 3-year-old. And literally within just a few months of time, he was back normal. Now he's off all his medications, and he feels better than he's ever felt. And enjoying it too.
I was going to say that's extraordinary. So what kind of diet, what kind of dietary changes, and it's almost becoming a cliche to say that we're talking about changing a lifestyle, not going on a diet. That's right. What are the changes that you found in your research that you put into this piece that were the most successful at accomplishing these high health, high quality of life outcomes?
Well, actually, Paul came from a different culture growing up here in the South than I did. And honestly, we felt like we were a pretty healthy family. We had actually made the switch to vegetarian diet when I lost both sets of grandparents to different forms of cancer. And my mom started doing some research. So we cut out the meat eating, but I was a huge cheese addict and loved all kinds of dairy. And for me, doing the research, what became readily apparent was that any animal source products were what I needed to remove from my lifestyle, as well as heavily processed foods and those with added oils and processed sugars and things of that nature. And it really is getting back to plants as they are grown, in their whole form as much as possible, and very minimally processed foods like whole grain breads or whole grain pastas and things of that nature. Cooked beans. Yeah, absolutely. Beans, lentils, grains, vegetables, fruits, nuts, and seeds. Getting back to those kinds of foods that produces the nutrition that we need to have optimum health. And once I made that switch and got away off all the dairy and all the processed foods, then you see huge and dramatic changes.
Yeah, Louise and I ate. I've been vegetarian since I was 16, but we always ate a lot of cheese. And it was maybe 6-8 years ago. I'm trying to remember what it was. I think it had to do with the Cleveland Clinic. But this study came out that found that cheese was actually more destructive than meat. There's more. There's more fat in it. It's where a lot of nasty toxins bioaccumulate in the body of the animals, and some cheeses are worse than others. But cheese just ain't good, and so we pretty much cut the cheese out of our diet. But on the other hand, occasionally we'll go out to a restaurant and hey, there's some cheese on something. How rigorous? We're not struggling with health problems around this, but if we were, how rigorous would we have to be to accomplish what you're talking about? Would it have to be literally 100%? That's it? No animal products, period?
Yes, that's what we hear from all the doctors, is that, again, depending upon your condition, like you said, your condition, you don't deal with these issues, but for anyone that's dealing with a chronic disease, there's different protocols from different doctors and for different types of diseases. But they all agree on the fact that getting animal products out of your diet is the key to having optimal health. Yeah. And disease reversal.
And I think it really goes back to the law of economics, where you take maximum risk for maximum reward, or maximum, you invest for your return. And so however much you invest, you're hoping to get more out of it. So if you invest just a little bit and you jump in just a little bit, you're probably going to get a little in return for your investment. If you dive in all the way, you're going to get maximum reward.
Right. So we're talking basically here about veganism without the refusing to wear leather shoes stuff, right?
Well, actually, we do that too.
We do that as well.
Well, I mean, you're perfectly welcome to, but whether you wear leather shoes or not is not going to affect your blood pressure.
Exactly. That's right. Exactly. But, honestly, for us, when we went into this, we went into it through the door of health. Veganism from an ethical standpoint wasn't really our perspective, but quite honestly, the more that we became aware and the more research we did and realized where not only the food was coming from, but where so much of what we wear as well is coming from, and what animals go through to produce that, and what we're doing to raise animals, how many resources and the amount of those resources we're putting in to get those products. from an environmental standpoint, it doesn't make as much sense as going with a whole food plant-based lifestyle, which includes not only the food, but then the rest of how you conduct your life as well.
Right. Remarkable. What provoked you to produce this, and what will people find when they go to eatingyoualive.com?
Well, what I'll answer the first question. What kind of inspired us to do it was my doctor approached us here in Chattanooga about producing some assets. He gave seminars on whole food plant-based eating, and so for me in particular, that was a completely off the grid kind of way of living. So I didn't believe in it.
And he dragged the rest of us along, is what he did.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
The rest of the team,
kicking and screaming.
And so we all decided to do this, and then within 6 weeks, I dropped 45 pounds, went back to my high school weight. And
in 6 weeks?
In 6 weeks, that's crazy.
Now, isn't that supposed to be unhealthy to lose that much weight that fast?
I don't know, maybe it is, but I do know that I felt better after that 6 weeks than I felt since I was in my 20s, and I had no more issues with my rotator cuff, no more tendonitis. All those kinds of issues went away, and so I didn't think it was.
Were you limiting calories or simply eliminating all animal foods from your diet?
Simply eliminating all animal foods from my diet, as well as all oils and added sugars and processed foods. So again, going back to that, eating food out of the ground as grown. Basically, right. we have a high-powered blender, so you can pretty much produce anything. I mean, for me, growing up in the South, I like really, really rich foods. So we can produce all that from plants.
Yeah. Oh, Paul Bragg has been singing that song since the 20s. I mean, he's no longer with us, but yeah. I'm sorry, Marilee.
No. I was just going to say, going back to your point about the calorie counting or portion control, it was ridiculous how much food we were eating, because I'm not a very big person, but I could probably out-eat the guys to some degree for some of the meals. And we would be going back for like third helpings, like just heaping platefuls of food. So for anybody who thinks, well, wow, they weren't eating a whole lot, or they were really skimping.
Or you just eat salads all day.
Yeah, that's all we ate was salad. That's not it at all. We were eating a ton of food and still got the results.
Yeah, and still getting very, very healthy. So what do people find if they go to eatingyoualive.com?
You'll find a trailer. You'll find kind of some blog stories, a little bit about the rest of the crew, and some articles that we hope people find helpful. Also some recipes, our favorite recipes. And you'll also be able to pre-order the DVD that's being made available. And very, very soon, actually, there's going to be an appearance on the Today Show, and the digital downloads will be available at that point. As well as you'll find locations for screenings that are occurring all over the world right now.
Wow, that is absolutely great. Paul David Kemmener Jr. and Marilee Jacobs. Paul is the director. You are the co-producers of Eating You Alive. The website is eatingyoualive.com. What a provocative title. And the Twitter handle is _Eating You Alive. Do I have that right? @_Eating You Alive?
You.
Great. Okay. Paul, Marilee, thank you so much for being with us today. And good luck.
No, thank you, Tom.
Keep eating good. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with your calls right after this. And welcome back. Craig, watching Free Speech TV on Direct TV in Seattle. Hey, Craig, what's on your mind today?
Good afternoon, sir. Well, it's my understanding that black people have the right to vote, whereas we don't all have the right to vote, but they do.
Arguably, that's the case. Yeah. Where are you going with this?
Well, if that's the case, thank you for continuing to bring up cross-check. If enough black people could show that their vote, their placebo vote was not counted, and they didn't know, and because they don't inform you that if you don't follow up, it never counts.
Right.
Could they show harm and take that all the way to the court system? Because they can show harm, whereas if we don't have the right to vote, we can't.
They could, and Greg Palast, who did the documentary on this, "The Best Democracy Money Can Buy," which you can watch on Amazon for $3, or you can buy the DVD. Or you can watch the free on YouTube here on this, youtube.com/Thom Hartmann. He's been a guest a number of times, and he just lays the whole thing out. Greg Palast is working with a couple of members of the Congressional Black Caucus, and I'm not sure if it's the official NAACP or just some folks in the NAACP about specifically using that as a wedge, as a legal wedge to try to go after crosscheck. Whether it's going to happen or not, one of the big problems is that the Democratic Party doesn't want to talk about this. They're kind of like head in the sand, just like they didn't talk about the theft of the election in Florida in 2000 when Jeb Bush directed Catherine Harris to knock 90,000 African Americans off the voting rolls in Florida so that Jeb's brother could get within 500 votes of stealing the White House. And
sort of why I'm asking, is it possible, because without help from the senator or whatever, that enough people could show harm that it could be taken through the system? Because once it's in the system, the news media can't avoid talking about it. But right now, they can just ignore it, and it's just pitiful.
Oh, well, there's been lawsuits going on about the Florida thing for 16 years, and the media is still ignoring it. So, Craig, the ability and willingness of the media to ignore issues that either hurt Republicans or might help people of color is extraordinary. The media is so good at chasing shiny objects and ignoring substance, right? Bernie Sanders did this town hall last night on CNN that was absolutely brilliant. That was rich. I mean, just rich and filled with good content. And what is it the CNN is talking about? Well, he said he's not sure if he's going to run for president in 2020. Come on, give me a break. It was a question he didn't even want to answer. So I wouldn't depend on the media, but I think that your idea of taking the Voting Rights Act essentially and saying that there is clear discriminatory intent associated with this. The challenge is proving the discriminatory intent. There's clearly discriminatory effect because minorities tend to have a smaller pool of names to draw from. So when you're looking for people with the same names, you tend to get more minorities than Caucasians.
Yes, but when you hear that junior and senior and middle names have zero effect, you're like, wait a minute.
Right.
That's almost no other case that you would be involved in that they do not take your first, your middle, your last name, and any other thing that goes with that.
Oh, I'm with you, Craig. And this is clear voter suppression. And in fact, I would say probably without cross-check, right now, Hillary Clinton would be president and the Senate would be controlled by Democrats. And maybe even the House. But, there it is. And we need to continue to raise hell about it. I totally agree. Craig, thanks for the call.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by EcoWine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, EcoWine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Matthew in Smithfield, North Carolina, listening on WCHL 1360 AM. Hey, Matthew, what's up?
Hey, good morning, Tom. Hey, it's really the afternoon. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's quite all right.
Hey, but you know what happens? You say WCHL, but you can't listen to WCHL anymore.
Oh, really? They flipped the station? I'm sorry to hear that.
It happened. That's so funny that you said that because I wanted to sneak it in as a secondary issue, right? WCHL was an institution for progressivism in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. This is the heart of it, which is being gutted out by, taking over the chairmanship of the universities, et cetera. It disappeared 2 months before the election. And it is no coincidence, Mr. Hartmann, that we do not have a progressive voice. So my side issue is anybody who's interested, there is an incredible market for progressive radio that is not being done on a bandwidth locally in RTP, in Raleigh-Durham area, the new mecca of America that's going to double in size in 10 years. It's just...
I agree. And it's, by the way, this is true of the entire United States. And the reality is that, I'd say the majority of the radio stations in this country are owned by companies or individuals who have, at the very least, conservative leanings or Republican affiliations. And
a tremendous example of how deregulation, like the Communications Act of 1996 under Clinton, to expand a market share of some entity was a big mistake, and it turned into the dumbing down of localization.
I agree, and let's remember, by the way, that even though Bill Clinton signed the bill, this was a Republican initiative. But anyhow, you wanted to talk about the local board of elections and interstate crosscheck?
Yes, sir, and I'll be very quick. And I have to lay the foreground because I was actually appointed as a precinct, voting poll judge by the Democratic Party, and I actually oversaw a mistake in the voting, which included 9 ballots that were given to the wrong people outside of the city of Clayton, North Carolina. That thing was in court for almost 2 years before that. So just the idea that there's this voter fraud is just completely stupid. But excuse me, I'm going to my board of election in Johnston County, North Carolina, and I'm going to ask very specifically if they participate in interstate crosscheck, what the rate of provisional voting has become in the last 10 years trending, and exactly what the rate of people coming back and responding to those provisionals so they actually exercise their democratic right as far as I'm concerned. After finding out that information from the director of the Board of Elections, who is a friend of mine, I'm going to see what we can do if we do participate in it. And at that point in time, then I'm going to seek legal counsel at that point. So that's going to be my part, being a real progressive in the party. Other than that,
that's great, man.
Tom, I'm just thinking what your observations are about me doing that and other people doing that in counties across the country.
Well, and we had an earlier caller who pointed out that there is not an affirmative right to vote in the United States. In fact, that was the basis of the Bush v. Gore decision. But it is against the law to deny the right to vote to somebody based on the color of their skin. And so, using the Voting Rights Act, if you can demonstrate that the number of provisional ballots over a decade, and it started, the whole idea of provisional ballots came out of the Help America Vote Act in 2002. That was literally invented in the Help America Vote Act, HAVA. So it would be fascinating to see how provisional ballots have ramped up from 2002, because that's a measure of voter suppression. One, these are people who think they voted, but their vote never gets counted, and because they've got thrown off the voting rolls. And then number two, is there a disproportionate impact in communities of color versus white communities? And if so, you may have the basis for a hell of a lawsuit. Matthew, thank you.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I would love to see this interstate crosscheck get a lot more publicity. We'll be right back.
Is they argue that, well, globalism lifts other people from other parts of the world out of poverty, in a sense. Like, if I own a business, why can't I set up shop somewhere in China or Cambodia or someplace like that and take somebody, or India, or take somebody who is making, 10 cents a day to making, $10 a day? Isn't that lifting someone out of poverty? What are your thoughts on that? And
yeah, it is lifting someone out of poverty. Absolutely. Absolutely. But it's like, please don't try to pretend to me that you give a rat's ass about that. please don't try to pretend to me that you really care about that person in India being lifted out of poverty, because we all know that what you're really doing is you're saying, to hell with that guy in Flint, Michigan, who is making $16, $18 an hour working in that factory, or the guy in Indiana who was working in the Carrier factory making $35 an hour. To hell with him, to hell with his family, to hell with the state, to hell with the United States. I'd rather make more profit by having somebody in China make this thing for 50 cents an hour. And yeah, it's going to lift them out of poverty, and I'm going to wave that flag like I'm some kind of noble person. You're not a noble person. You're a capitalist. And, you know, I get it. And frankly, if people, if business people in this country will not behave in a way that benefits this country, we need to have rules that incentivize them to. And we historically did. We didn't, you know, we've never said, and I'm not advocating that we should say, you can't, you know, have something manufactured in China or India or something like that. We've never said that. Instead, what we said, and we were quite clear about it, and literally from 1793 until the 1980s, what we said is if there's $1 worth of labor in a pair of shoes made in Connecticut, and you want to make those shoes in Mexico where it's 50 cents worth of labor, or in China where it's 20 cents worth of labor, then when those shoes get imported from Mexico, there's a 50-cent tariff at the border, so that it's still going to cost you $1 to make the shoes. If you bring them in from China, there's going to be an 80-cent tariff at the border, so it still costs you $1 to make the shoes. So you might as well just make the shoes here in the United States. In other words, we define the rules of the game the same way you define the rules of a football game. You say you can't just go up and punch somebody in the kidneys, right? I mean, it might be a great way to win a football game, you know, take out the quarterback, but we're not going to let you do that because it's not in the best interest of the sport. It's not in the best interest of the team. It's not in the best interest of the audience. It's just not in anybody's best interest except that one selfish son of a bitch who's, excuse me, son of a, pardon my phrasing, SOB, who punched the guy in the kidneys. You get it? And basically what these people are saying is, I'm going to punch my country in the kidneys. I'm going to punch a family in the kidneys in the United States. And I'm going to pretend that I'm doing it for some noble reason because I really care about this poor family in China. Let China worry about families, poor families in China. That's why they have a government. That's, you know, our government should be worrying about poor families in the United States. We've got, you know, cities that have been hollowed out. We've got rural areas, for that matter, that have been hollowed out by the loss of manufacturing in this country. And the two rationales that are most commonly put forward are the one that you and I just discussed, Michael. And then the second one is, oh, manufacturing is crappy work anyway. We really don't want manufacturing here. Who wants to stand in an assembly line putting a bolt on a screw all day long for $35 an hour? Right. You know, I mean, nobody wants to do that. That's degrading work. Well, excuse me. I grew up in an era where people worked in factories. Half my, probably 3/4 of my friends' parents worked at Oldsmobile in the factory. My dad worked in a tool and die shop. There's nothing wrong with manual labor. In fact, manual, and I did a fair amount of it myself. I mean, working my way through college, I didn't complete college either, but I didn't work in an assembly line. But, I worked in a gas station. I was changing tires. I was doing brakes. I was pumping gas. I worked in a Bob's Big Boy restaurant as a cook and as a dishwasher. There's nothing wrong with that kind of labor. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It just needs, there's dignity in labor. There just needs to be reasonable pay. And as long as laborers in the United States are competing with labor from outside the United States that's a fraction of the price, you're going to, David Ricardo laid this out in a paper called On Labor back in 1819. As long as the available supply of labor exceeds the demand, the price of labor falls.
Do you think we'll be able to sustain a manufacturing-based economy into the future?
Of course. China's doing it right now. Japan's doing it right now. Germany's doing it right now. Half of Germany's economy is manufacturing. They're one of the most advanced manufacturing economies in the world. Why? Because they protect their exports. It's very difficult if you live in Germany to import things from outside that country, things of consequence. And, and it's very easy for manufacturers in Germany to sell things in Germany. And the way they do it, they used to do it with tariffs. When I lived there in the 80s, they did it with tariffs. I wrote a novel based on this about a guy trying to get around tariffs. I'm very, very familiar with it. But, you know, when they joined the World Trade Organization, they changed that to using VAT taxes. So now, you know, if you want to export something from Germany, they discount it by 17%, which was the VAT tax that's only supposed to be charged to Germans. And if you want to import a car into Germany, a made in America car, they add 17% VAT tax to the import price. So, you know, we're back to the how much does it cost to make those shoes in Connecticut kind of thing. And every country, every developed country in the world is using VAT taxes like tariffs, except us.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I got this tweet yesterday, or I saw this tweet. Somebody retweeted it to me from American Patriot. And American Patriot said, seriously, no, I'm not making this up. This is the Twitter handle is SVONEWSLETER. So it must be SVO Newsletter, at SVO Newsletter. Anyway, at Patty Murray, why don't you just shut up, Murray? Stop crying. You lost. We won. We are repealing Obamacare, not the Affordable Care Act, not the ACA. And it's like, this is, and then you know, this other guy, Paul Crater, he says, Ryan plans to gut Medicare, not health insurance for old people. Yeah, it's got to be a joke, right? Somebody says you're being funny, right? And then they link to this Facebook page. And just to put this in a frame, you'll recall back in 2000, what was it, 9 or 10, when Obamacare was being passed. It was being called the Affordable Care Act. Everybody's calling it the Affordable Care Act, and people were calling into this show all the time saying, "Hey, don't call it Obamacare because you know all the Republicans hate Obama and they will hate Obamacare." And then President Obama himself started calling it Obamacare, and so I and pretty much everybody else started calling it Obamacare. He was quite proud of it, and justifiably so. So here's the thing, and I keep saying, you know, Obamacare. He did the best he could. This is not a critique or a criticism of President Obama in the least. But Obamacare is the Republican health care plan for the United States. It was introduced by Richard Nixon in 1972. It was put into place. The Heritage Foundation fleshed the whole thing out, all the details, including the individual mandate. This was the Heritage Foundation's idea. And Mitt Romney put it into place in Massachusetts in 2000 and was going to run for president on it. So the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare are the same thing. So this person on this Facebook page says, you know, it tweets or shows a picture. Senate votes 51-48 to repeal Obamacare. Okay, it's a C-SPAN picture, and the Facebook person says, one step closer to fixing this mistake and only a couple weeks of Barry's regime. 2017 is already looking up, right? So fixing the mistake of Obamacare. And then somebody replies and says, you know, really cool of you to treat those of us who need the assistance provided by the ACA with such disregard. Really sells the whole underlying theme of Republicans acting like vindictive, word I can't say on the air. For every perceived slight at the hands of Democrats these past 8 years, it's a party now that openly celebrates the misfortune of others. And then somebody else replies and says, Jesus, where to start? First, we're talking about Obamacare, not the ACA. Second, my health insurance is through the ACA, so I'm definitely not the kind of person to look down on others for needing help. I'm just saying I'm glad this is finally happening because Obamacare is a failure from the start. Remember healthcare.gov? All it was a brainchild of liberals, and they couldn't even get the site to run right. So why should any of us have any faith that they could get socialized healthcare right? They didn't, and they couldn't. Again, it was a mistake that's finally being fixed. So this person is asserting we are not repealing the Affordable Care Act, we're repealing Obamacare. And then, of course, the response to that, If you're on Obamacare, why the F are you celebrating the outcome of this vote? If the Republicans get what they want, you lose your insurance. And the person says, I'm not on Obamacare. My health insurance is through the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, which is what they had to come up with after Obamacare crashed and burned as bad as it did. So I'm going to be fine. Right? And then another person replies, no, seriously, are you effing kidding me? They're the same effing thing. Obamacare is just a stupid name for the ACA that Republicans came up with to make moronic voters like you automatically despise the idea of it just by hearing the name. And it effing worked. And then, you know, another person says, seriously, all this time you never once checked for yourself to see that the whole, you know, what was up with the whole Obamacare controversy, you know, realize? And it just goes on like this. Well, the point of this rant, you know, other than the obvious irony and stupidity, you know, among Republican voters or people who, let's say, watch Fox News and listen to right-wing hate radio and don't understand the difference between, that there is no difference between the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare, is that I am predicting, and I've been predicting this now basically ever since the Republicans won the election, that they are going to perform a legislative sleight of hand where they are going to repeal the Affordable Care Act and replace it with the Affordable Care Act. They may not even change the name because most Republicans who hate it hate Obamacare. They love the Affordable Care Act. Hey, my kids can be on my coverage until they're 26. You know, I can't get thrown off because my kid gets cancer or I get cancer. There's no lifetime limits. I can't, you know, no more rescission. You know, it's like, you know, I get subsidies. You know, people like this. So, and then they'll start calling it Trump care. And 20 years from now, and you know, you've heard me say this before, 20 years from now, the Republicans are going to be going, wasn't that amazing how we got rid of that Obamacare thing and replaced it with Trump care that has worked so well? And I just, you know, we'll see if I'm right or wrong, but that's my prediction for 2017. Kenyatta in Redlands, California. Hey, Kenyatta, what's on your mind today?
I want to say Happy New Year to you first, buddy.
Well, thank you. Back at you. Happy New Year.
I mentioned to you in a previous conversation that of all of Donald Trump's appointees, Jeff Sessions is the one that has worried me most. Yeah. So I'm sure that you can assume that I've been watching quite closely the hearings. And one of the things that took place yesterday, that there's a TV host by the name of Ira Madison who tweeted out something about Jeff Sessions getting his Asian grandchildren from Toys R Us and parading them around to prove he's not a racist. This is the same Jeff Sessions who said that the NAACP and the ACLU were un-American and communist-inspired, who said that the KKK was okay until he found out they smoked pot, who, and speaking of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 as a piece of intrusive legislation, who in 1981 referred to a political opponent as, said to a political opponent, I'll be watching you and the nigger, and has made all types of disparaging statements, particularly against blacks. I wanted to know what your thoughts on that were because, you know, Ira Madison got a lot of guff about this, but I have never seen those in all of the appearances of Jeff Sessions that I've seen on, you know, television and so forth. I've never seen those Asian grandchildren so prominently displayed as they have been in these last couple of days. And however unsavory it may be, I absolutely agree with Ira Madison. What do you say?
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you. I am a big believer in awakening and redemption. And I think the classic example of that is Robert Byrd. Robert Byrd, you know, grew up in the South, grew up in West Virginia in the 1920s and joined the Ku Klux Klan, worked his way up in the Klan, was an unrepentant white supremacist. And at some point in his life, he woke up. He got it. He publicly apologized for it, and he spent the last 20 years of his life working as hard as he could to undo the damage that he had done in the Klan and working for, you know, everything from voting rights to just right across the spectrum. Jeff Sessions is now trying to portray himself essentially as Robert Byrd. He's trying to say, well, yeah, maybe back in the day, that's how we talked back in the 50s, back in the day. I mean, he's not saying this. He's just kind of completely avoiding it and denying all of it, obviously. But the message that the Republicans are putting out is, oh, he finally got religion. He woke up. But if that was the case, there would be some evidence of it. And I've seen no evidence of it other than that he's apparently friendly to people of color who work at the Senate. But, and who knows what that means, right? So I am not impressed by, convinced by, even at a small level, any kind of, road to Damascus experience, any kind of epiphany on the part of Jeff Sessions. And he scares the hell out of me as an attorney general.
Okay, well, we've got concurrence there. Not a whole lot more I can say about that, but I do want to say this, if I may.
Yeah, 20 seconds.
Okay, the vehement racism that is directed specifically towards black people in this country has to come under another name other than racism, because there is something very specific. If you look at police shootings and any number of other things peculiar to blacks, it has to do with the way we came to this country. And I'm going to keep on that issue until we get honest about it in this country. Thanks for the time.
Sure. Good talking with you, Kenyatta. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Get my ear back in here. Denise, first-time caller watching us on Free Speech TV in Lincoln, Nebraska. Hey, Denise, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I've just come to start watching Free Speech TV on my direct TV.
Oh, great. And tell your friends.
Pardon?
Tell your friends.
Oh, I am. Believe me. I have came to this country in 1979. I'm from Canada. I'm a First Nations person. I've had relatives on both sides of the border, which is ridiculous because now I am a permanent resident alien, which is very weird. And for a long time, I was not invested in voting because I couldn't vote. I still cannot vote. But slowly I became more and more aware of politics. But one of my question is today, and maybe it's because I'm not as politically savvy as I think, but I'm just wondering about the Electoral College. And, it's really outdated. I'm familiar, actually just recently, about the racism that was behind it. But in this next while with Trump, being president, I hope that he gets impeached immediately. But anyway, but I'm not looking forward to Pence either. But I'm just wondering if in this 4 years, are we able to actually able to get together and remove the Electoral College in this 4 years, or do we have to wait till this 4 years is over? And what types of groups have to come together? Or, I don't know, so many signed signatures, or what the process is to remove the Electoral College?
There's two ways to do it. The first is to actually remove it, and the second is to render it irrelevant. And the way that you remove it, because it's in the Constitution, is via a constitutional amendment. And constitutional amendments are really difficult to do. I mean, we've been a country for 240 some odd years, and we've got, 27, 29 constitutional amendments? Fewer than 30. And so it's a real tough lift. So plus the Republicans love the Electoral College because it gives them an advantage in the elections.
Yeah, they seem to be the only ones to really benefit by it.
Yeah, exactly. And so they're not gonna give this up. The second way to do it, which is to render it irrelevant, because under the Constitution, and again, this was to protect the slave states, ironically, but in the Constitution, basically what it says is that every state can choose how they determine who their electors are and which electors they send to Washington, D.C. to vote for president. So a state does not have to, the electors of a state do not have to vote in the Electoral College for the person who won the state. It's not a requirement in the Constitution. So there's this thing called the Popular National Vote. popularnationalvote.org, I believe, maybe it's .com, is the website. And and they're at like 170 or something like that electoral votes in terms of states. They have to hit 270. But when enough states sign on to this thing, what these states are all committing to is we will flip our electoral votes, 100% of them, to go with whoever won the national popular vote. And once enough states to represent 270 votes sign up for that, do that, pass that legislation in their state, then the Electoral College is toast. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Ron in Grand Rapids, Michigan, listening on WPRR. Hey, Ron, what's up?
Hi, I'm a first-time caller.
Thank you.
WPRR rebroadcasts your radio programs, sometimes a couple days late. Today they rebroadcast the one from the 19th of December, when the Electoral College was voting. So we're a bit behind. That's why I haven't called in before, although I wanted to many times. I didn't know if I would be relevant in view of your topics. But I hope it's an open agenda.
Sure.
First of all, I wanted to ask you if you had seen or heard of the documentary from a dozen years ago called Hacking Democracy.
Yes. That was one, in fact, Earl Katz was one of the executive producers on that, as I recall. Earl's a friend of mine.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard you mention it, and Greg Pallas doesn't mention it either in his book or on the video, which I own, and I was surprised. He mentioned Diebold, but he didn't mention that these units that Diebold used were actually programmable, which they utterly deny. This was over 10 years ago, and if they're still using those machines, then of course that's possible. But that wasn't the main reason I called. Well, I didn't want to alert other listeners. I happened to find it accidentally when I was looking up documentaries in that topic at the Grand Rapids Public Library across the street from where I live. But I wanted to mention basically a slogan. We need a slogan, and over the past 5 years since I was active in the Occupy movement, as soon as I moved to downtown Grand Rapids, my learning curve went vertical. And I heard within 2 weeks about WPRR, and I've been listening to it ever since, of course, your program and many, many others. What an education. I've been snookered for much of my life, but I do give credit to the Christian democratic movements in Europe. Grand Rapids is the heir of one of those, a Dutch one, and its organization, Center for Public Justice in Washington, D.C., has for decades been a voice for alternatives, including an alternative way of creating third parties and so forth. But I think we need a slogan in view of the deprecation and destruction of the commons. Think of the old work, The Tragedy of the Commons, from decades ago. Currently, we're seeing the theft of the commons, and it's finally working on me, and the pressure is building to realize that if the term republic means anything, the public thing, it means exactly the commons and all of those things which the public own in common. Now, I grew up conservative. I grew up in North Hollywood, went to North Hollywood and Hollywood High School in the early 60s, had friends who were part of the John Birch Society in both high schools. It was started in 1969, of course, in California. My mom subscribed to American Opinion magazine, which is the JBS organ.
I remember it.
Would often, after school, head over to the American Opinion bookstore on Hollywood Boulevard or in North Hollywood on Lincolnshire and look over their stuff. And
you ever read,
in college,
did they get you to read None Dare Call It Treason by John Stormer?
I got it, but never read it, and I'm kind of glad.
Yeah, that book. My dad took me to a JBS meeting when I was 13, and they gave me that book for free, and I took it home and I read it, and it just scared the hell out of me. All these communists in the State Department. Oh my God. Anyhow, back to you, Ron.
There we go. Well, and then in college, I became a member of the Conservative Book Club. Little did I know that everything that was coming down the pike there, from von Mises and von Hayek to Ray Cohn's biography of McCarthy, William F. Buckley, and so forth, was all neoliberalism. We didn't know what that was. I was a conservative, not a liberal. Well, the Dutch Christian Democrats educated me on that score. But it's been a while try to catch up. My wife, ex-wife, Lazard, is a brilliant natural resource geographer, an environmental geographer, now a provost at a Christian college north of Boston. But she educated me immensely, and I'll always be grateful. I started to realize that the commons are being torn to pieces. And, as a conservative, I grew up thinking of the republic, or the U.S. as kind of olive drab. I was active in the ROTC unit at Hollywood High School and would have been at Cal Poly, which had the largest ROTC unit in the country at that time, California State Polytechnic College in San Luis Obispo. I mean, it was conservative all the way, but I was being snookered. And so come to realize these past 5 years especially that we have something to protect. It's a duty to protect. It's a patriotic duty in a real significant sense, but it's being torn apart. Well, a year or two after the Grand Rapids chapter of Occupy folded, I started a blog site, which at the time, on some advice, I decided to call occupythebible.wordpress.com. And within a year or so, after encouragement from my daughters, I decided to retitle it, although it's accessible both ways, as Occupy and Liberate.
There you go. Ron, I have to ask you to summarize, because I've got a bunch of other people who'd like to get in here, and I've only got 2 minutes left in the show.
Okay. Toward the end of that series, it's a bit more fun. I hope to restart it in a week or two. I thought what we need to do is demarketize and republify. I mean, one tends to think of those who
So what's your slogan for the commons?
I'm sorry?
What's your slogan for protecting the commons?
Basically, demarketize and republify, or occupy and liberate the commons. But the idea of republifying plays on the idea of a republic, the common thing, and to basically restore the commons.
Yeah, great ideas.
In direct opposition to the privatization movement.
Great ideas. Great ideas. Ron, I've got to move along, but thank you very much for the call. I appreciate it. It's great to hear from you. Rex in Cleveland, Ohio. Hey, Rex, we got a minute to the end of the show, actually.
Yeah,
it's yours. What's up?
I think democracy is almost dead in America. The Republicans control over 35 states and governorships and legislatures, and now they have a dictatorship in Washington. One of the ways they did this, when you mentioned Clinton okayed the radio station buyout, the Republicans bought over or control over 2,000 stations nationwide to spew their lies and propaganda and control and brainwash the public. Things are worse than it seems. People should wake up and realize what's going on.
Yeah, I don't disagree, Rex. I'm in the business. I know what you're talking about. And it's one of the, it's one of the great things about Sirius Satellite Radio is that they've got a progressive channel. Thank them for that, right? You're listening on it, aren't you?
Yeah, the Wall Street Journal published who gave the most money to Trump. One of the number ones is Sheldon Adelson. He keeps his name very nicely out of the headlines. You very rarely hear from him.
All right, that's very interesting. I didn't know that. Rex, thanks a lot for the call and for listening on Sirius. And thank you all for being with us today. It's been a fascinating day. We will continue to watch. I mean, there's just a lot going on. The president's speech tonight, his farewell address. You've got the hearings. A lot to talk about tomorrow. So in the meantime, don't forget, number one, let your friends know about progressive media. Number two, get active. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com.